Please be advised that FATV is conducting audio and video recording of this meeting for public broadcast. I ask that anyone else in the audience who is recording this meeting to please identify themselves for the record by standing and stating your name and address. Seeing none, Councillor Walsh, would you please lead us in the salute to the flag?
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
No, Melissa.
Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Right,
President Zarella.
Here.
Councillor Boschman.
I'm right here.
Councillor Kuchar.
Here.
Councillor Di Natale.
Here.
Councillor Fleming. Here. Councillor Green. Here. Councillor Hughes.
Here.
Councillor Schultz.
Here.
Councillor Squalia.
Present.
Councillor Van Hazinga.
Here.
Councillor Walsh. Here.
Thank you very much. There are no registrations for remote public forum. I would ask that anyone in the audience who wishes to speak on any item on the agenda, please approach the center table, identify which item you would like to speak on, and you may speak for not more than 2 minutes.
Mr. President, when he speaks, can he remove his mask so we could understand him? I asked the chair over here if you can ask the Board of Health man.
I will defer.
Regulation states if there's social distancing allowed, then you can remove your mask.
All right, so the center table is well over 6 feet from any counselor and not facing the audience, so I would say yes. Someone speaking at the center table may remove their mask.
Hi, is this working? Good. Okay. Hi, I'm Mark Dunn. I'm the Executive Director of Newview Communities. My address is 470 Main Street here in Fitchburg, and I was just coming to support the appropriation of funds for Low Park that the Finance Committee, I believe, voted favorably on. I believe that's 144-21. I guess we just want to say that it's a beautiful park. It's one of the few parks in the North of Main neighborhood. I'm glad to see the funds going there, and I think that will work in well with the timing of the hopefully new development of the Fitchburg Arts Community. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Anyone else wishing to speak? Seeing none, we will now hear a report from the Appointments Committee. Councillor Kuchar.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Appointments Committee met earlier today. We took up a new appointment of the Water Wastewater Commission, of Mr. Mark Paramini, all of which were approved.
I make a motion we accept.
Second. I'm sorry. I don't know where my head is right now. I have a motion and second to accept the report of the Appointments Committee. If there is no objection, we'll take this under unanimous consent. Seeing none, it is approved. We'll now have a report from the Committee on Records. Councillor Hughes.
Thank you, Mr. President. At this time, all records appear to be in order.
I make a motion we accept.
Second.
I have a motion and second. If there is no objection, we will take this by unanimous consent. Seeing no objection, it is also approved. We have 2 appointment letters from His Honor the Mayor. I'm going to take them in reverse order. We have Mr. Daniel J. Cunningham as a member of the Fitchburg Disability Commission, term to expire October 1st, 2021. That will be sent to appointments. We also have Amanda K. Alford, Assistant City Clerk for the City of Fitchburg, as Provisional City Clerk, effective October 9th, 2021, term to fill the unexpired term of the current City Clerk, Mary D'Alderetti, until January 2023, or until a suitable replacement can be found. I am going to ask that we take a suspension of the rules on this.
So moved.
Second.
I have a motion and second for suspension. Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Councillor Walsh.
Yes.
Councillor Zarella.
Yes.
Counselor Boishman.
Yes.
Counselor Kuchar.
Yes.
Counselor Di Natale.
Yes.
Counselor Fleming.
Yes.
Counselor Green.
Yes.
Counselor Hughes.
Yes.
Counselor Schultz.
Yes.
Counselor Squalia.
Aye.
Counselor Van Hazinga.
Yes.
That is unanimous.
All right, now, if the clerk would like to address the council on this subject, you certainly may. I don't want to put you on the spot, though. I'm happy to explain it myself if you would prefer.
I'd be happy to address the council. Thank you so much. Councilors, it has been a joy and an honor to serve with each and every one of you. I only made this decision, COVID made us really reevaluate a lot of things in our lives. And I took a position that is much closer to my home. It would only be a 15-minute commute. So as much as it pains me to leave, and it does, I am so grateful for your time and energy and for appointing me, and thank you.
And thank you. I can certainly say it has been a pleasure working with you, and you have been indispensable to my efforts to learn this role as president and to run these meetings. You will be very greatly missed. Now, Mary will still be with us until October 9th, but so that there is some certainty going forward, that is why I asked for us to vote on this evening rather than sending it to the next meeting. Councilor Boishman, you had a...
Yeah, I just want to make sure she's not leaving because of me, Marcus and I giving her a headache.
Not at all, Councilor Boishman. I will definitely miss you.
Move to accept the appointment of Amanda K. Alford as provisional city clerk.
Second.
I have a motion and second. If there is no objection, we will take this by unanimous consent. Seeing none, Ms. Alford is will be our provisional city clerk, effective October 9th.
I think you made a wise choice. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have a special presentation from the ARPA team. If you would like to approach, and begin whenever you're ready.
Mr. President, I'll begin the proceedings.
Certainly.
Good evening, councilors. Today, the ARPA Working Group, composed of myself, Auditor Calvin Brooks, Health Director Stephen Curry, and Interim DPW Commissioner Nick Erickson, Community Development Planning Executive Director Tom Skorowski, and Chief of Staff Patrick Hare, have prepared for you a presentation on the City of Fitchburg's allocation of funding, the American Rescue Plan, also known as ARPA. The ARPA Working Group, which was formed after reviewing the eligible expenses of the funds to be representative of the departments that could have the most impact, have been working for the past several months strategizing how these funds may be best utilized in a deliberate and thoughtful manner. The City of Fitchburg received $31,238,459, of which will be delivered to us in 2 installments, the first of which we have already received and includes our county allocation. Tonight, we will go over the public health emergency thus far, the history of COVID-19 funding, an overview of ARPA, and how these funds may help our public health, DPW, and specific community departments, as well as next steps and additional potential sources of funding. To date, we have informally requested possible projects from city teams, have explored project eligibility, and developed criteria for how we may weigh projects. Additionally, we are planning on creating a community working group to advise us on spending these dollars. That group will have a city councilor on it as well. Folks, I'm proud of the work my team has accomplished so far. Fitchburg is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to spend these dollars. we must ensure that we do so in a responsible and far-reaching way. We want these dollars to have a large impact while helping the most residents as possible. That said, the theme of tonight is more to come. There will be numerous questions, I'm sure. Unfortunately, we won't have many of the answers for you. However, I do promise that my team and I will continue to keep you informed. We will engage with the council and the public, and we will forge a better Fitchburg. Now, at this time, I'd like to turn the proceedings over to Public Health Director Stephen Curry.
Good evening, councilors.
Good evening. Could you please make sure there is a mic directly in front of you when you speak?
Technical difficulties. Is it moving? Yeah. Okay. Perfect. Thank you, councilors. Apologies for the technical difficulties. I'd just like to start off by giving you a little bit of an update on where we stand with our current active confirmed COVID cases in the city. These statistics are as of Monday. Total cases we've seen in the department since March of 2020 is now at 5,319. Monday, as of Monday, we had 236 active cases in the city. A week before that, so from the week before Monday, from the 13th to the 20th, we've seen 148 cases. And then 2 weeks was 234. As of Monday, we've seen 39 breakthrough cases. So those are cases that are actually fully vaccinated. Deaths since March 2020 in the city are 146. We've actually seen 2 deaths in September in the last month. Just to give you a little bit of an idea, the graph to the right, I'm sorry I don't have a better updated graph, but it does accomplish the goal of showing the peaks and valleys of active cases, which has made planning for testing, vaccination, hard to plan ahead. You really have to react to the cases. But just a comparison from 2020 to 2021, when many of people have said that this pandemic is going away, I just want to point out that in 2020, from March to September 20th, there were 862 cases. This year, 1,229, which is a difference of almost 367 additional cases. So what I want to do is point out what the health department must do very briefly. The first item is contact tracing. Very briefly, nurses and contact tracers actually reach out to the confirmed cases. They interview them, and they try to identify those who were considered close contacts within 6 feet of a cumulative 15 minutes over a 24-hour period. It's a very important process. It's very difficult if people don't comply, but it's a very important process to try and stop the spread of disease. In 2020, just for an example, we had over 10 nurses providing contact tracing. Most of them were contracted with. Several of them were also school nurses, which assisted in the contact tracing end of things. We were able to fund that process from a grant from the Department of Public Health. It was a regionalization grant, and it was through the Montezuma Public Health Network. In the last year, it totaled about $550,000, which was a tremendous help, but we're running close to running dry on those funds. In the end of 2020 and throughout 2021, Received a lot of assistance from the Department of Public Health Contact Tracing Collaborative. They have absorbed a lot of the overflow and surge that we could not handle. However, they are become overwhelmed at times. As I explained earlier, the peaks and valleys, they hire folks, try to staff them to help all the 351 towns, and then when the cases disappeared or declined in March, or in May, I'm sorry, they released all of the cases. So now we're looking at another surge, and they're unprepared, similar to we are. So not all cases are getting effective contact tracing. So, and then to boot, I believe DPH is going to cut the contract with the CTC at the end of this year. So we might be left on our own to provide that service. Some of the problems that we encounter with contact tracing is obviously staffing. Now we are limited with funding. We are now forced to deal with clusters because the CTC does not handle the clusters. So clusters are basically when there are 2 or more cases in one facility at the same time, which is quite common these days. Other problems with contact tracing, language barriers. We have a large population of Spanish, near 30% in the city, so we need to be prepared to reach out to those folks. And again, the state CTC will no longer be around that we're aware of by the end of the year. The second thing that is effective public health would be testing. It would be great if we had constant testing in the city. And again, the peaks and valleys affect this. The hospitals and the clinic, the CHC provide testing. However, when the need declines, they move their resources around, and it takes a while to get back to where we need to do adequate testing in the city. I also did recently purchase some saliva kits, 1,000, through the regionalization money. So we will be I was hoping to set a date tonight for the test and announce it, but unfortunately we have a few more things to do to get that program going, but it should be within a week or so. But it's become a problem with testing right now, and when we're not identifying cases is when the spread increases. The third thing that the health department does is vaccination. We've had over 70 clinics in the city. Vaccinated over 10,000, basically contracted through the same grant from DPH. But we've also utilized the Vax bus and the Department of Public Health bus has been instrumental in coming downtown to events and certain events in the parks, as well as events at the airport. We need to continue that, and we need to really have a permanent date and location to offer clinics at a certain hour each week to make sure that people are aware of it and they can come down and get vaccinated wherever that location is determined. The other thing I'd like to mention is we will be implementing a vaccine coordinator. The council did pass that back, I believe, a couple of months ago. That vaccinator will be on board very shortly. And hopefully we will utilize that coordinator to increase our vax rate in the city, which at present is about 51%. It's much lower than the state, about 10% or 12% lower. So the coordinator will and try to increase vaccination rates, as well as assist the schools with reaching their vaccination rate of 80% goal on October 1st, so they can remove their masks. A tight window there. I also like to explore incentivizing vaccine, whether that be gift cards or whatever it takes to get folks to come down and get vaccinated. And then whether we contract or hire to conduct these clinics, we do currently work with the CHC. They're a tremendous help holding these clinics. Maybe it's not us hiring, maybe it's them sharing some funds so they can expand and we help them expand. Those are some of the problems that we run into, obviously, with vaccination clinics. Multiple nurses are needed and vaccinators, and you also need funds. So at this time, I believe I'm turning it over to Calvin.
Do I get a clicker?
Sure.
And how does it work?
I'm not telling you. Big arrow to the right.
Right? So my role here right now is to talk about the funding that the city has received for COVID use. The first piece of funding we received was from the Department of Public Health. The city is the lead community in the Montechusett Public Health Network. And right at the start of the pandemic, we received $200,000 in grant funding. And I believe at that time, council took a vote to this is a revolving fund, and up the amount of spending in that revolving fund to $700,000, just to be sure we had adequate space to do the work we needed to do. These funds from the Department of Public Health have covered the bulk of costs related to testing, tracking, and vaccinating. Currently, the city's funding is at $550,000, which is what we've spent, and I understand that the city recently received notice of an additional $300,000 in funding for this network. The second source of funding was from FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency. This was covering the period from January 20th, 2020 to December 31st, 2021. Funds are designated to be used to eliminate or lessen the immediate threat from COVID. And that interpretation of what an immediate threat is very strict. For example, contact tracing is not reimbursable from FEMA. They will cover vaccinations, but not contact tracing. As an editorial comment, dealing with FEMA is like being told that it's okay to go swimming, just don't get wet. Currently, the city's spending is at about $244,000 for FEMA. The third source, which you may have heard about, is from the CARES Act. That's covering the period from March 1st, 2020 to December 30, 2021. For necessary expenditures incurred due to the public health emergency with respect to COVID-19. The big caveat on this was that we could not use it for lost revenue. And from the city, my perspective as city auditor, the biggest hole we had was losing the hotel excise tax revenue from Great Wolf. That was about $1 million in our budget. This CARES Act funding could not be used to fill that gap. And it's also for purposes not budgeted as of March 27th of 2020, basically saying if you've anticipated costs in your budget, we're not going to give you money for it. The city is eligible for up to $3.6 million in reimbursements. Our current spending is about $630,000 on that. The city also received just over $1 million through the Community Development Block Grant funding, $86,000 from the police department, and $92,000 through the airport. The most recent funding we have for COVID has been through ARPA, or the American Rescue Plan Act. Covers the period March 3rd, 2021 to December 31st, 2024. So it's actually better than 3 years. We also have an additional 2 years to the end of 2026 to actually spend the money. We have to commit it by the end of 24. We can spend it up to 2026. Its purpose is to support immediate pandemic response, to bring back jobs, and to lay the groundwork for a strong and equitable recovery. And as we go through this presentation, we'll get into much more detail about the specifics of what these funds can be used for. In terms of how we're administering this money and the accounting of it, because it's coming through the city, we still have to follow Mass General Law for spending. The Division of Local Services has required that we set up a separate fund. So I've set up a Fund 19 for the full amount of $31 million. I believe it's under the mayor's department, so it should be toward the front of the reports, the monthly reports that you get. And the way it's set up is that the 31 million is in its own org, but the expense, instead of being expenses, the expense says for transfer for other projects or reserve for other projects. And as projects are developed, I will create an org for it so we can track each project individually. And that kind of begins to flesh out what the role of the city council is in this process. City council does approve all expenditures from grants. So this is just another grant. It happens to be a particularly large grant and a complicated grant, but it's still a grant. So as projects arise, city council will be asked to approve spending on each project. We anticipate that an initial budget presentation would come in the first quarter of 2022, which would be next January, February. And we expect that there would be additional budgets presented in 2023 and 2024 to allocate any remaining funds. We're looking at this as a process over the next few years, not money that has to be spent right now and today. So as projects go, if they need more money, we can come back and ask for more. If they fizzle out or they come in under budget or we find other funding sources, we can free up that money to be used for other things. So at this point, I'll turn the presentation over to Tom Skorowski.
Good evening, councilors. Tonight, I want to talk a little bit about the ARPA funding, just giving an overview of eligible expenses, and then talk specifically about the economic development spending that's authorized through ARPA, which will kind of fall within the purview of my department. So these funding objectives are taken straight from the Secretary of the Treasury. So the objectives for this fund are to support COVID-19 response efforts, as Calvin mentioned, to replace lost revenue, supporting immediate economic stabilization for households and businesses, and also to address systemic public health and economic challenges that have contributed to the unequal impact of the pandemic. And that's something I'm going to talk about a bit this evening because it's really a critical piece of this law and what is deemed eligible. As I'm sure you've seen, many populations have been disparately impacted through the pandemic, and this is really an effort to make sure that funding is equitably distributed accordingly. So the spending timetable, I won't belabor the point, as Calvin and both the mayor as well have mentioned it, but again, obligated by 2024, spent by the end of 2026. And a lot of folks have asked us how the funding is allocated and why Fitchburg receives such a large allocation compared to surrounding communities. I'm not going to get into the weeds here, but basically the allocation formula mirrors the Community Development Block Grant formula. And basically what it is, there's two different formulas that the federal government looks at, and it's a combination of measures related to poverty, population growth, and the quality of a housing stock, basically how old the housing is, how overhoused people might be in overcrowded housing and what have you. And basically from those two formulas, they provide to the local government the larger of the two. So that accounts for why Fitchburg receives such a large allocation, and it also accounts for, again, the underlying need to make sure that this funding is being allocated to work to redress economically distressed areas. So the framework of the interim rule, which is actually on the city webpage now, among other things, we have an ARPA portal that's located in the services section, I believe, of the webpage. The interim rule is from the Secretary of Treasury, and it basically calls out what is an eligible expense through ARPA. And just to give you the cliff notes, it lays out a non-exclusive list of what's allowable. Categories like intervention in qualified census tracts, which I'll talk about in a bit, public health, which Steve had mentioned, direct aid, community and economic development, and infrastructure. But again, it's a non-exclusive list, which means they give some things that would be what we call a safe harbor use, things we definitely know we can spend on, but it also does afford local governments a degree of discretion to determine if something does qualify under this act. It encourages expenditures to address racial disparity, inequity, and disproportionate harm, again, lending to the things I've mentioned in the previous slide. And it expressly prohibits a few things, among them pension fund payments, legal settlements, federal match requirements, and debt payments. And there is what they call a presumption of eligibility within qualified census tracts. And qualified census tracts are those most economically distressed census tracts throughout the country. And we'll take a look at the 3 that are in Fitchburg. And again, as I mentioned, affording a degree of discretion to local governments, we get a great deal more discretion within these 3 census tracts because these are areas that are the most economically distressed and, for the most part, suffered the most from the COVID pandemic as well. So this is an effort to build back economically and public health-wise in a better fashion. So those are some things, once again, a non-exclusive list of things that could happen within a qualified census tract, but it really does expand beyond that as well. And the 3 we do have in Fitchburg, Lower Cleghorn, the downtown census tract, and the North of Main neighborhood are the 3 that are designated as a qualified census tract. So one of the things we need to do is we're reporting how we're using these funds. We need to report the way that we are responding to the either COVID or economic impacts thereof. This makes our justification much easier if we can show the spending is happening within these 3 census tracts. And the link there is right on HUD. You can kind of take a look at where those census tracts are specifically and zoom in on the webpage and everything. We'll also make this available on the city website in the ARPA page as well. And again, some ineligible uses of funds. I mentioned most of them. Premium pay unrelated to essential work, which we'll get to in a minute. Pension legal settlements, rainy day funds, financial reserves, and outstanding debt. And finally, infrastructure not directly addressed in ARPA. So there are certain elements of infrastructure, water, sewer, broadband, that are addressed. There are other things that are not, such as paving the roads. And if it's not directly addressed in ARPA, it cannot be used for that purpose.
Why would we need road paving?
And these are the categories they have for eligible uses of funds. Again, this comes directly from the Treasury. Supporting public health expenditures, addressing negative economic impacts caused by the emergency, providing premium pay for essential workers, investing in water, sewer, broadband infrastructure, and replacing public sector revenue. So my colleagues are going to talk about the bulk of these, but again, right now I just want to focus on this one, addressing negative economic impacts, and talk about a few things that we could use for this particular category. So eligible items include things such as delivering assistance to workers and families, supporting small businesses and nonprofits with loans, with grants, in-kind assistance, counseling programs. And they also mention specifically speeding the recovery of impacted industries such as tourism, travel, and hospitality. So we can all think of certain industries that actually have done quite well in the last year. And there are others, conversely, that have really suffered. So they actually call out specifically that we should target funding towards those industries that have suffered. And then, of course, rebuilding public sector capacity, not just by rehiring staff, replenishing the state unemployment fund, but also implementing economic relief programs. And then, again, the additional flexibility for those hardest hit communities, which we know as the qualified census tracts. And those are just a few of the safe harbor uses, but again, it's not exclusive. And at that, I will hand it over to Calvin to talk about premium pay for essential workers and lost public sector revenue.
Thank you, Tom. So of the 4 categories, I'm speaking about 2 of them, lost revenue covers the 4 calendar years ending December 31st, 2023. And you notice that it's calendar years, so we start with a fiscal year 19 total, and then compare it to calendar years ending 21, 22, 23. The amount calculated for the year ending December 31, 2020 is about $2.6 million. This is the least restrictive category. Basically means of the 31 million, we can put aside 2.6 for use that still has to meet the requirements of ARPA, but because it's replacing lost revenue, we have much greater flexibility in how we use it. Because the city controlled its spending during the pandemic, we don't have much backfilling that we have to do. We didn't borrow or do some things to cut corners in order to get by. So we're in a pretty good position. Our intention would be to hold these funds short-term until we have a review of what projects are being presented, because we can use these funds to leverage other funding sources, because they can be used for basically things that we would do in city operations. So we get a little bit more flexibility with this. The other thing I will just mention is premium pay. The purpose of this premium pay was to assist lower paid workers who had to deal with the health risk in working. This was, it can be for the private sector, and I think it's more geared toward the private sector. In the sense, the intention is to take care of grocery clerks who had to work through the pandemic, even though there was a risk to their health, to the custodians at health centers who had to work through the pandemic, even though it was risking their health. And they were people that don't normally do work that puts their health at risk and aren't compensated in ways that recognize that risk. It includes both the public and the private sectors. There is an earnings limit on the payment, so above a certain amount, it's not really justified. Looking ahead, I think the risk of exposure for health risk is going down as vaccines get out and so on. At this time, the city has no plans for a program, and having just come back from a conference of auditors accountants, that question was raised, and none of the other communities in the room indicated that they had any plans for a program. So at this point, I'll turn the presentation back to Steve Curry.
So getting back to the three topics of public health, the best fight against COVID, it would be great if we could continue the fight and get even stronger against COVID by providing the adequate staffing to conduct contact tracing. We need to get that staffing on board ASAP. Before the CTC Contact Tracing Collaborative goes out of business at the end of the year. They are already overwhelmed. They are already returning cases to us. So we need to be in a better position to provide better contact tracing. The other thing I would like to do is look at contracting with or hiring an epidemiologist. Epidemiologists are terrific help in difficult cases or when there's questions regarding testing, vaccination, or contact tracing. It would be nice for the contact tracers especially to reach out to epidemiology on a regular basis. The state does provide that service. However, the service is completely overwhelmed once again. The second thing is testing. Obviously, we'd like to provide a constant test site where folks can recognize where they can go get tested and take away the the peaks and valleys of not having good access to testing. So whether, as I mentioned before, whether we staff these on a constant basis, whether we partner with the clinics, if they're willing, and expand on that, or if we can host a Department of Public Health Stop the Spread site. The Stop the Spread outfit is out there, except that they like a permanent site where they don't have to move their equipment around. They're willing to come out here, but they want a permanent site. Obviously, to do all this takes money, but we must, good public health involves people getting tested. On the right is a flyer of a test site that we conducted at Cogswell Park back in December, which was very well attended. The third thing is vaccination. We need to increase staffing again and have a permanent site where folks can go get vaccinated if they wish. And again, I'd like to talk about or explore ways to incentivize the vaccine and provide a permanent site, as I mentioned. And for all you younger folks, that happens to be Joe Friday, and the actual quote was "just the facts, ma'am," but I didn't realize not everybody knows who Joe Friday is.
I remember him.
So I just want to briefly touch on another grant that's for, I was just notified Monday, we will be receiving another $300,000 grant, and that is for regional public health. It will help with COVID. It will help with COVID services and hiring staff for contact tracing, testing. But it also has a goal of, it's a 3-year grant, has a goal of, for the health department in Fitchburg, the lead agency, expanding inspectional services, nursing, and communicable disease tracking, et cetera, for those towns that don't have health staff. So it's funding for the 13 towns that are in the Montezuma Public Health Network. If it wasn't for that regionalization, we would not have been eligible for this funds, very similar to the last year's funds. We're also exploring a partnership with the Montezuma Regional Planning Commission. They're going to provide some IT support for GIS tracking. It would be nice to know where those cases are located and provide heat maps and take a look at information where we can determine cases and the location of where the cases reside. And this grant can also help with the epidemiologist issue I just mentioned on the last slide. And then here's where I asked for the council's support on a reserve fund for public health. I would like to, as I mentioned in the previous slides, I would like to provide adequate contact tracing and constant testing and vaccination, and have it available to the public as much as possible, and let the public be known and have easy access to it. As I stated, things change very quickly. Right now, we have a need for testing, but things change so quickly, it might, in the next couple of weeks, it might be vaccination that, or something else. But it's just to put the city of Fitchburg in a position where we can make sure that we're stopping the spread of COVID to the best of our ability. And now we have funds to do it adequately. So I believe I'm turning it over to Tom.
So I'm going to talk briefly about the local selection process and how this table in the mayor's office and a community group we'll be working with will help to spend these funds. As the mayor often likes to say, he spent these funds 10 times over, and I'm sure everybody at this table, in your heads, you've all spent this $31.5 million 10 times over, and I think it's really critical for us, given that we've got a lot of needs, and really the money can dry up pretty quickly when you start thinking about all those needs and what they are. We needed to develop a clear process for determining what our priorities were and kind of how to work with the community to ensure we're meeting the priorities of the community as well. So the first thing we did was develop a selection criteria that we're really looking for as we're putting this budget together. And it involves a set of criteria you see here. The first two are pretty simple: eligibility and timeliness. So if a project is not eligible under the Treasury's interim final rule, we can't spend on it. And timeliness, if the funds can't be obligated by 2024 and spent by 2026, we can't spend under ARPA. So those are kind of the two initial questions that we're going to use. And once you screen through those and we have proposals that are eligible and timely, we have this set of criteria we're looking at to determine the best use of funding. So number one, a tangible impact. Does this project directly impact Fitchburg residents and businesses? We want to aim for projects that have the highest level of tangible impact. Long-term impact. We don't want the impact of this project to be just a few months long or even a year. We want to go 10 years. We want to think beyond 10 years and really use this funding to leverage long-term impacts for the city. And also impacts that are aligned with community need. We want to make sure projects are responding to a salient need in the community and are, once again, reaching populations of disproportionate harm as well. We want to have alignment in this funding. We want to make sure the budget we put together is reflective of our strategic planning efforts, whether it's the Economic Development Strategic Plan, capital planning efforts with our Department of Public Works, the planning efforts underway currently due to COVID. We want these plans to be aligned with the planning efforts that are currently underway. And then return on investment is a really critical one. We want to make sure we're spending on items that have an impact that extends far beyond our budget allocation. We want to try to leverage additional funding, whether the state ARPA funding, whether private investment, and developing those public-private partnerships to take our dollars further. Because once again, $31.5 million sounds like a lot of money, but at the end of the day, if we can use that to leverage even more than that, that's really what we need to be looking at. And I should add, this is also what the state is looking at when they see that we got $31.5 million. When they're looking to invest in community projects, they're coming to the table and already have mentioned to us if they're going to fund a project with state ARPA funds, they want to see that matching funding, which is a responsible use of funding, and I think something we should be doing as well. And then efficiency, we want to make sure the impact is greater than the resource expenditure. And then finally, and this one's a little bit intangible, but we want to make sure this investment's transformative. This is, as the mayor mentioned, a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. And we want to make sure we're funding things that could not happen without this funding. I think we have a really great opportunity to make some real change, and we should be taking that into consideration. And was certainly the last piece of this holistic set of criteria we put forward. When we do release our request for proposal on Monday, which I'll talk about in a minute, we'll have a detailed set of criteria which outlines each of these further on sort of a grading scale of, I believe, 0 to 4. But it's going to be a critical component to help us sort of filter out and prioritize as we're working through. Another thing we're going to be developing is an ARPA advisory committee. It'll be comprised of 10 to 12 community stakeholders. First and foremost, the goal is going to be demographic and subject area representation. We want our advisory committee to look like the community. We want our advisory committee to have residents, businesses, nonprofit leaders, folks in the healthcare fields. We want a representative sampling so we can really make sure the projects that we're proposing are reflective of the need in the community. And then this group will review project proposals and make recommendations to Mayor DiNatale and the budget team. And as the mayor had mentioned, it'll include an ex officio council member. The committee will be announced later in October, and then shortly thereafter, when proposals from the community come in and from city departments, they'll be tasked with reviewing those proposals and scoring them accordingly. So the local RFP, We've already received a lot of inquiries from community groups, and as I mentioned, businesses, nonprofits, and other entities are eligible for ARPA funding, and they've asked. Believe me, they've asked. So we wanted to put together a clear way to have an open and competitive process for the community. So on Monday, next Monday, the 27th, we will release a request for proposal. Basically, the funding must be ARPA eligible and aligned to the city's ARPA criteria as outlined. An eligible nonprofit or public agency, and of course, city departments can apply for this funding. A few important dates to tag. So again, September 27th, it'll be live on the city's ARPA page on our website. October 7th, we'll have an informational session to discuss potential proposals with folks that are interested in applying. And November 1st is when the RFPs will be due through the online portal by 5:00 p.m. Eastern Time. And so everything will be online. There'll be an online portal where the application will be there. The RFP will be there as a PDF as well. We'll really try to get all the information there open and available for people to review. I should note there's also a public comment portal, so folks can, if there's anything they'd like to see in the community, even if they're not an eligible nonprofit or public agency, if they can't submit a proposal, they can submit their ideas, and it can be part of the consideration process. And at that, I will turn it to the last of the groups of eligible categories, infrastructure. Nick.
Thanks, Tom. So as Tom mentioned previously, the ARPA money, the 31 million, can be used towards addressing some of the city's infrastructure needs, which is a great thing. They do specify, however, that it needs to be used towards water, sewer, and broadband infrastructure. So it cannot be used to pave the roads. So I saw that 31 million. It's the first thing I thought of, why don't we get some roads paved? Unfortunately, that's not what we can use it for. I'd love it if it wasn't that. If that wasn't the case, but here we are. So we are looking at pursuing additional funding for those separate needs through the infrastructure bill, which is working its way through I believe through the House right now. So we're keeping our eye on that, and we're hopeful that that can be used to address some of those other needs. Okay, sorry about that. So the city does have, major needs when it comes to its water and sewer systems. They're aging systems. Portions of them have far exceeded their useful lifespans. This results in maintenance issues, quality of service issues, and it's very taxing on the DPW and DPW staff, just in general. So as we look for ways to spend this ARPA money, we're planning to target improvements specifically for downtown and other major residential and commercial corridors of the city that kind of meet the criteria outlined in the ARPA law. So particularly areas that are disproportionately affected by COVID-19. So the plan is that making these investments in the city's water and sewer systems will reduce the overall burden on taxpayers and ratepayers of these two systems. And where the city itself doesn't own any communications infrastructure, but because broadband infrastructure is one of the things being targeted by ARPA funding, we're looking to partner with local private utilities to address their needs. So Comcast and Verizon are the two communications utilities in the city. So with that, I'll turn it over to the Mayor's Chief of Staff, Patrick.
Thank you, Nick. Councilors, tonight for you, we will go over the timeline and potential other funding sources that we may see in the future. This will start to thin out as we get a little bit later on, but as mentioned before, in October, we'll begin working on our quarterly reports. We'll begin issuing proposals, calculating our lost revenue, and we'll be forming the ARPA committee group. In November, we'll be preparing our first budget and evaluating proposals. In 2022, we will begin seeking the council approval for our first budget. We will begin the procurement process. Mary Delaney, our Chief Procurement Officer, will likely join our group here to help overview and see that process through. And we'll begin calculating more additional lost revenue, and then again, submitting quarterly reports as we move through. 2023, a little bit more of the same, calculating more lost revenue, submitting more quarterly reports, preparing any second budget for any second allocation and additional allocations that we may have to come back to council to be approved, and continue working with our community group on those funding sources. 2024, by the end of 2024, December 31st, that is when all of the funds need to be allocated. So that is the main date in 2024. 2025 brings us a little bit more of the same, more quarterly reports. And in 2026, that is when all funding must be spent, and we will close out our allocations. Mixed in with ARPA funding a little bit, as we've talked about some of the projects that are available to be funded through these sources and not available to be funded, are potential other funding sources that may come through that may be able to help us supplement some of these projects. The current infrastructure bill as it's making its way through the U.S. Congress is slated at $1.2 trillion right now. There's the potential reconciliation bill, again making its way through Congress at $3.5 trillion. The state did also receive its own allocation of ARPA funding to the tune of $113 billion, some of which may make its way over to us, and as Tom had mentioned, may seek matching funds through our allocation. And we also received local home allocation, $1.7 million, which will help us address housing insecurities. And as the mayor said, the theme is more to come. We will begin working with the council to keep you up to date on our next progress. We will keep you informed as we explore ways to involve the community, and we will finalize project criteria and eligibility. Thank you.
Thank you. I will open it up to the council for questions. I already have 2 councilors who have indicated that they're waiting to speak, 3. 4. I would only request that councilors restrict their comments at this time to informational questions only. Since we are not taking a vote on this tonight, there will be ample time to debate, comment, opine at a future date. So just ask any questions you want about the substance of the presentation, and we'll debate it thoroughly when further requests come in front of us. With that, Councilor Boschman.
My question's for Steve Curry, the Board of Health Director. How's the situations in the school for COVID in the city of Fitchburg?
I believe we've had all but one school have a cluster, and that school being Goodrich. All the other schools have had clusters, and we have a roughly from about age 5 to about age 20, I would say roughly about 75 cases.
Now, I was listening to what you're talking about on this COVID stuff and the people you want to hire and all that. I'll talk loud if you want me to. I can talk very loud. But my question, I have no problem in some of your requests, but when I hear you talk, I don't hear you mention CVS, Walgreens, Community Link Center down at Market Basket, the hospital up here, and those places. You don't mention them at all. But yet we want to hire more people to distribute the vaccine when you can go to CVS and Walgreens and the Community Health Link or up the hospital up there and the other one. What is the person? I don't mind hiring people as long as they work. I don't want to put money out there for an hour. I mean, have a guy work exactly a total of 1 hour for 4 people. I mean, and you're going to pay him all day. I won't buy that. You know what I mean? When you can just walk up to CVS and do the exact same thing that nurse is going to do.
Counselor, can you ask your question and let him respond,
just
please?
To let him know. And to Mr. Erickson, I'm very happy that I talked to Mr. Brooks numerous times on that ARPA fund. And I'd like to see a lot of the money go to the water source separation, MSRP, you know.
Counselor, questions only, please.
All right, don't mind it, forget it. All right, that's it. That's it. Steve, remember what I say, because we're going to have a battle on this if it's not done right.
So,
Counselor Fleming, unless you have
can I answer that question, or?
If you know what the question was, then yes.
Somewhere in there was a question why we don't rely on the CVS, and for whatever reason, residents have been identified by the Department of Public Health canvassers that are out there. For whatever reason, residents don't want to go to the pharmacy. I can't tell you the reason why, but a lot of residents around Park Hill are not vaccinated, and they have the option to walk to CVS. I can't tell you why they don't. I'm not sure how consistent the service is at all the pharmacies. That may have something to do with it, but again, the canvassers have identified people around pharmacies that aren't vaccinated.
All right, thank you.
And then on your other question, Counselor, the ideal situation is to either hire a contract with nurses. Nurses can be very flexible and provide service to all three of the public health needs. So if they're sitting around and there's nothing to do with contact tracing, we can certainly do another public health activity. And if we do contract, it would be a per diem. So if nobody shows up, we don't sit around and wait.
All right.
Thank you. Councilor Fleming.
Thank you very much for the presentation, for all the hard work you've had to put through during this crisis. I just have a few questions regarding the statistics in Fitchburg. So how many of the cases of COVID with the deaths, where every death is tragic, is solely related to COVID and no other existing condition? And to add to that, what is the age? Is there an average age of death for these?
I'm having trouble hearing the first question.
Oh, you didn't hear the first question? So how many of the deaths? We've had 146 deaths since March of 2020 and 2 since September. You want me to take this off?
Yeah.
Okay. So we've had 146 deaths since March of 2020 and 2 since September.
So are you asking, are the cases have pre-existing conditions?
Yes.
The reason why they're getting?
No. The deaths, were they solely from COVID, or were there pre-existing conditions that contributed?
Oh, death
Yes,
would
to
be,
the deaths.
well, it could be a combination of issues. So the death record, if it does contain COVID, it makes it to the death.
But we don't know if it was solely from COVID or if there was somebody
the
had.
main source, or the main cause of death.
Okay, and do we know what
There probably were other contributing factors to the death.
Okay, all right. People have been asking, and I don't know the answers to these, so I thought I would try to get the answers for them. And do we have an average age? Are they in their 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s?
Average age.
An age of the death?
Average age.
I would estimate the average age to be in the upper 70s.
Up in the upper 70s, okay. And do we know why the change, why there's such change from people wanting the vaccine versus the testing? Is there something that might be going on that they say, I need to get tested so I can go travel, versus I just want to get tested because I feel sick? We don't have any statistic on that, correct?
The problem with the disease is it hasn't been consistent. So, for example, the CHC and the hospitals reduced the hours of their testing, and they may have reduced staff or relocated, whatever the case may be, and it takes them a while to get it back organized. Don't forget, they're also providing 3 functions as well.
Right.
So for whatever reason, it takes them longer to put the testing back into place. I know the CHC just yesterday expanded their testing hours, so hopefully we can utilize where they're going with it and maybe help them out with it. But it's where your resources are directed for the need at the time, and it changes so quickly that it catches everybody with their pants down.
Okay, and then one final question. The positive cases, do we know if they're getting very ill or they're just testing positive and with no symptoms? You know, are they without symptom? Do they have symptoms? Like, what is the percentage of?
I would say the large percentage of cases are ill.
They
okay. Have symptoms, yes.
Okay.
Younger crowds are a little less common this year to have no symptoms or be asymptomatic like last year. So if that helps answer your question.
Nope, thank you. All set.
Thank
It's all estimation, of course.
Councillor Green.
Yes, my question is, of the $31 million that is to be granted, how much of that will be set aside for specifically the school department, where the Board of Health just mandated a vaccine mandate for all school employees? So how much of that will be spent bridging the funding gap between the current employees that choose not to get vaccinated that are going to be without a job?
Yeah, I think it would be a combination of maybe an administrator to do the paperwork end of it, and maybe a nurse or two to work with the school nurses. I don't think it would be a large expense to keep the possibility of vaccination in the schools on a regular basis.
Councilors, if I could also just address, one thing that we did not discuss tonight is the allocation that the schools received from their own ARPA funding, which I believe was, Calvin, do you have that exact number? I believe it was about $7 million that they received in ARPA allocation. That is not part of our $30 million allocation.
So we shouldn't plan right now, and this is not future, but for right now, in the early part of spending, to see any of that $31 million come before us for any school-related or school department-related expense or loss of revenue.
I won't say that our $31 million allocation couldn't be used on school projects, just to say that the schools did receive their own allocation.
All right, and then to Mr. Curry, how much money roughly would you want or need for the reserve fund that you would be requesting?
I would probably like to ask for $500,000, $500,000 to start.
Okay, and then that could be reoccurring if we needed that, or if you needed that?
I think what we could do is provide some sort of summary of expenditures or to the council on a certain period of time. Such.
All right, I mean, I'm pleasantly surprised that it's not, $16 million. I mean, that to me sounds reasonable, and that we could support that through the life of, through 2025. To get you what your ask is. And then one last question for anybody on the board that can answer this. How are we going to identify who or what population makes up the racial disparities and the inequalities that we want to address with this big fund? Who does that?
So I think as I sort of discussed previously, the populations of disproportionate impact are the qualified census tracts. Let's say that's our proxy measure for are we reaching communities of disproportionate impact. That's certainly how the Treasury has defined the term. But they also did give wide latitude for communities to think about how they define that need within their communities above and beyond just a census tract boundary, right? So given that much of this funding and the funding formula itself comes from CDBG, my recommendation will be that we mirror the CDBG formula in terms of 80% of the area median income, and then we're reaching what we call low to moderate income populations, which strongly correlate, similar to the qualified census tracts, with those populations of disproportionate impact. And in terms of sort of racial and ethnic breakdown, I think, it certainly would depend on the neighborhood, but by and large with the city, our largest ethnic group we're about a third Hispanic or Latino. So we certainly want to make sure that we are, dedicating funding to help support that community. But of course, there are many other communities within the city. We want to make sure we're giving fair and equitable representation across the board.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Councilor Squalia.
Thank you. I have a few questions. I'll just go down the table. For Auditor Brooks, the $31.2 million we don't anticipate spending for some time, the bulk of it, is it an interest-bearing account, and will we be earning interest on that money?
The treasurer would be able to answer that exactly, but yes, I believe it's in an interest-bearing account, although interest rates are pretty low right now. Something unusual for this, because it is a federal grant, we are allowed to keep the interest we earn. So that will add to what's available. I don't think it's going to be significant in terms of the 31 million, but it's some additional funding, yes.
Something.
Counselor, for the record, the treasurer was shaking her head, yes.
Yes. Oh, good.
Adamantly, yes.
Good. Commissioner Erickson, it's noted we can spend this money on water and sewer infrastructure. Can we spend it on stormwater infrastructure, catch basins, drainage for roads, maybe in tandem, like Mr. Skorowski said, kind of leveraging other funding sources?
So I think if the spending was on a combined sewer separation project where we were installing new drain infrastructure as part of that project, then we could allocate some of the ARPA funding towards that. If it was a stormwater specific project, I don't believe that that would qualify under ARPA. But that's something that I'd like to look into a little bit further, because there is a major need for our stormwater system as well. And it is very similar to our sewer system in that it's gravity flow through a pipe network underground. So I think the argument could be made that it's, just as equally important.
Okay, great, thank you. Director Curry, of the 39 breakthrough cases we have, is it equal to the vaccines, Moderna, Pfizer, Johnson & Johnson, or do we not have that data?
I could get that data. My guess is it's pretty consistent of all three. Nothing has stood out to me, but I can give you exact numbers on that.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Skorowski, for the people and the organizations that want to suggest proposals, this presentation was really helpful, but still there's a lot of questions as to what specific projects might be eligible. Do you have a suggestion on where people go to learn more about whether or not their suggestion might be eligible for this funding in the city of Fitchburg?
So the ARPA webpage portal that we created includes a lot of that information, and full disclosure, a lot of it is plagiarized from other sources. Certainly the U.S. Treasury, National League of Cities, Mass Municipal Association. There's a webinar from Mass Municipal. You can watch the recording. If you get bored like me, you can just look at the PDF and get a sense of how they outlined eligibility. And if you're a real policy nerd like I am, you can read the whole interim rule, and then you really get a full understanding of what's eligible. But again, there is going to be an informational session October 7th. I can't recall if the time was in there, but I believe it's at 3. And again, that'll be on the website too, where you can ask questions of city officials if you have them.
October 7th, in the city, in person, or?
It's set up to be a virtual hearing, just so we can accommodate everyone. I suppose we could have it be a hybrid, but we've seen how that works or doesn't sometimes.
Okay, and you'll share that with councilors?
Yep, and the link will be on the website as well.
Okay, great. That's all I have. Thank you.
Counselor, additionally, we are working on contact information for that website, which will likely be myself. So my contact information will be up there where folks can send straight questions right to my email.
Great, thanks.
Thank you. I will just note briefly that I'm also interested in seeing that vaccine-specific information, but I will caution strongly that with such a relatively low number, unless there's an overwhelming predominance of one particular vaccine, it may not be statistically relevant. That said, Councillor Hughes.
Thank you, Mr. President. Before I ask my question, I just want to say how I really appreciate the fact of, I think I heard you say, Mr. Skorsky, that one of the things you want to do is form a committee that reflect the population in the city. So that really means a lot to me. And I think that that's a definite move in the right direction. So I really, really appreciate that. I want to give kudos. I don't know who put it together, but I really appreciate that. Now, the next part is following through on that. We can say one thing, but we want to make sure that we follow through because the community is listening. What does, make sure that, the selection process is fair and equitable. Just because we say we want to do something, making sure it reflects what we're saying, right? Okay, so that being said, how can a community member who is interested to be on the committee, can they apply, or did a specific group select the committee, or has they been selected already?
Thank you, Councilor. We have started kicking around some names internally as to who we think might be a good representation on this group. However, if there are members of the community that would be interested in serving, I would ask them to reach out to me, and we will consider them for the committee.
And also, Mr. Skorsky, you said the information will be on the website. One of the biggest complaints that I've gotten as a city councilor is information is on the website, but it's buried underneath 10 pages. It's not easily accessible. Is that something that we can kind of bring to the forefront, the accessibility, so they don't have to click through 10 other pages to get to it?
So you shouldn't have to click through 10 pages in this case, and I hope I'm delivering this the right way, but I believe if you look under services, there's a COVID-19 headline, and then ARPA funding is right below it. But at the same time, after our presentation this evening, I was going to go ahead, once IT shows me how, to put one of those banners on the website, so it's there as an alert, at least for the time being, as we're working through the RFP, the advisory committee process, and working through our first budget.
And also, will there be pamphlets and things like that put in community-based organizations? Because everyone don't access the website. So I'm just trying to think of multiple ways that we can generate some really, really good, diverse group of people to.
Right. And that's another great opportunity for plagiarism, because the Treasury put out a really nice quick fact guide. It's basically a 2-page document that outlines what's eligible, what's not, and the purpose of the funding. It helped inform a lot of the presentation here, and it'd be great to get those out in the community as well. And if you have any recommendations on where we want to distribute those, I'd be happy to talk offline about that.
Awesome, thank you.
Councilor, if I may too, we will also share this on the city's Facebook page as well as the mayor's as additional sources of outreach. And we haven't discussed this yet, but I'm assuming because we'll be doing the presentation on the 7th of October virtually, we'll be able to record that session, and then we'd be able to make that available as well.
Awesome.
Point of information, it's under the community tab, the ARPA for the city.
Councilor Schultz.
Thank you, Councilor Zarella. I had a question for Commissioner Erickson. It's my understanding that if we can do all of these water and sewer projects in the city and maybe target those places, the Lower Clegon and north of Main and Main Street, that after we complete those projects, of course, we have to resurface the roads, right? So.
Right. So the money can't be used specifically for paving projects, but if paving is required as part of the utility projects that we target, then the money, I think, can cover that.
Can cover the repaving.
The goal would be to address all of the infrastructure needs within a given roadway, and then ultimately pave after everything's been brought up to code, up to standard.
The other question I had was a more general question. about this working group. Have you set any priorities yet as far as where you think the money should be spent? Of course, this is a public health crisis, so I would think that you would want to address our public health crisis and Director Curry's needs at this point, but I haven't heard of any priorities being set yet.
Thank you, Councilor. Yes, as you've mentioned, the public health crisis and its immediate needs are our first priority. However, we have been trying to reserve judgment here as a committee until we can learn more from the community as to what their priorities might be as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Di Natale.
Thank you. Do we know what percentage of each category is allowable by the feds? Like, there's a COVID component that Mr. Curry addressed, there's a COVID component that Mr. Skaworski addressed, and then there's the infrastructure component. Is there a delineation of how much each section can get, or is it free and open for the city as long as it's within that scope?
The only delineation is the lost revenue piece, which is based off of a formula that the auditor calculates.
Other than that, now how much is that? Do we know? Ballpark?
So the lost revenue for calendar 20 was 2.6 million. I figure we could have another 2 million this year. Then the number could go down if we start to get hotel excise revenue from Great Wolf.
So can we conservatively say between 5 and 6 million of the 31.2 is for lost revenue?
You could say six or seven even.
Okay, so let's say it's 7. So that leaves about 24 million. That 24 million is free and open for anything within the scope of the ARPA stipulations, correct?
Correct.
So you could put $100,000 to COVID mitigation and 23.9 to infrastructure,
Correct.
right? Okay.
That's my understanding.
So I know it's early on, and I know we're going to have meetings through committee and whatever to hash out the requests. How much, do we have any kind of idea? Because an infrastructure project is a lot of money. And I'm thinking to myself, if we are going to do, let's say, 2 or 3 sewer separation projects, or 2 or 3 water main replacement projects, it's millions of dollars. So it would be interesting, you probably don't have an answer tonight, but it would be interesting to know how much of that 24 million is going to go to infrastructure, because those projects are going to eat up a lot of that 24 million. So do we have any idea right now what infrastructure projects we're going to be earmarking?
If I can answer, I would say no, we don't.
Okay.
And I think what we're trying to do, there was a question about, did we allocate? And I think at first we tried to set up buckets and say, well, how much are we going to put in each of the 4 buckets? And as soon as we started to do that, we were so flailing around because there's no way to really determine how much we should be putting in each bucket. I think the priority certainly is the Board of Health and the COVID crisis. But beyond that, I think what we need is more information, which is what we're trying to get with the RFP process, to say, all right, what are the proposals out there? What do people have in mind? And then we can begin to set a better handle on how we want to allocate. Yes, we could spend it all on infrastructure, but there might be some other good programs out there.
And I would add, the other piece of information we want to figure out is what these other sources of funding that may or may not come down the pipeline might be. The budget reconciliation package, infrastructure, and again, the state ARPA funding, which, judging by how the state runs their budget, we might see that in about 2 years, but it will be looking at ways to partner and leverage impact and all of that.
This may be a question for our senators and congresswomen, but I just don't understand what infrastructure has to do with COVID-19. What does the water main replacements and the sewer separation project have to do with COVID-19?
Counselor, you are correct. That's more of a national political issue.
Because my concern is this was spearheaded by COVID, but most of the money is not going to go to COVID.
Right.
So it's like, but I guess we'll know more as we go forward. And my last question is to Mr. Curry. Mr. Curry, you said that there are clusters in every Fitchburg public school other than Goodrich?
Other than Goodrich, yes.
What's a cluster? How much is that?
I'm sorry, 2 or more cases in one place at the same time.
Is there a mask mandate in the schools?
There is, yes.
So how is that possible?
Well, the schools are a very controlled environment, but they do go home, and so then they're probably not following the mask mandate at home, and the transmission is not likely in the school, it's likely at home.
Have there been transmissions in the schools? People coming to school ill and giving it? Because if everyone in the schools are wearing masks, why is there... I'm trying to understand what's going on.
Yeah.
They get it at home, they bring it into the school. Has there been a spread in the school as a result?
Likely, yes.
How is that possible if they're wearing masks?
Well, I mean, they're not wearing their mask when they leave school.
No, but when they're in the school, is what I'm asking.
Yeah.
I'm just confused. I'm being serious with my question. When they come into the school, they have to have one on, right?
Yep.
So how are they spreading the virus in the schools if they're wearing one? I don't
That's what I
understand.
said. It's not likely that the transmission was in school.
Okay. So they come into school and they test, they're ill. Have we been able to determine if they've gotten anyone else ill in the schools while they've been in the school?
No.
We haven't been able to determine that?
No.
Okay. I didn't know that. That's why I'm asking. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Walsh.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'll get my mask here. My question for Mr. Curry is, of the 5,319 cases, 39 of those were breakthrough cases? The total number of cases since March was 5,319.
Right.
And of those, 39 were breakthrough cases? Am I hearing that right?
Yeah, we're only recently, well, obviously, the information is new because vaccination's only been available for half of that period of time, but we've only been able to access that information within the last month.
Okay. Do we know whether the remaining 5,280 cases are people who are completely unvaxxed, or are they partially vaccinated? Do we know that, or no?
I would say that the bulk of cases are unvaccinated.
Okay. And my other question, I guess, I don't know if it's for Calvin or for Tom, but will the advisory committee be looking at not only RFPs, but department heads would be, I'm assuming, giving you a list of what requests they would be making? Is that...
Right. There'll be a portal for municipal officials as well. It'll, in some respects, mirror the CDBG application process where DPW, community development, we still submit applications just like everyone else.
Okay. And so then all of that will sort of be considered as, in the same mix, which proposal is... Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Van Hazinga.
Thank you, Mr. President. Councillor Brooks, you mentioned in your presentation that the CARES Act funding the city had been allocated $3.6 million, but has only been able to spend a little over $600,000 so far. Given the restrictions for the use of these funds and the time limit that it's only for the remainder of 2021, will we have significant opportunities to capture more of this funding, or will a lot of it be left on the table?
For that, Councilor, we'll be leaving a lot of it on the table. They're asking me to do a final report as of October 29th, because whatever's left over, the state then wants to be able to reallocate and perhaps work with. So I expect to spend a little bit more. There's some, CARES Act was supposed to work in sync with FEMA. FEMA has been a bear to work with, and so I may be withdrawing some FEMA applications and just shifting to the CARES Act because we have available funding. I think part of the reason we didn't spend the full allocation on that was that we had the other resources that were listed for funding for the projects we had, and just did not have a need for spending in terms of the COVID response.
So the unspent funds, will they go back to the federal government or the state, or what happens to that money?
It rolls up to the state, and then the state, if the state doesn't spend it, then it'll roll up to the feds. At this point, it just goes back to the state.
Okay, thank you very much.
Counselor, if I could just clarify, it is not necessarily that we are leaving an additional $3 million on the table unspent. It is that we do not have sufficient dollars that we would need reimbursement on. That money necessarily isn't in our pocket that we then have to write a check to give back. And the potential use for those funds is very limited in scope in terms of what we can spend on.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Councilor Kuchar.
Thank you very much. This question is for Mr. Curry. Mr. Curry, the contact tracing, that's to determine who an infected person has been around, is that correct?
Contact tracing is trying to determine contact of a confirmed case.
But yet you still can't answer Councilor Di Natale's question of whether or not it was transmitted in school during the mask mandate?
Well, the pinpoint of transmission is really not the goal of contact tracing. It's to reduce transmission, to make sure people are identified as confirmed cases and that they properly isolate or quarantine according to what the case is. So we're not really looking for where the transmission happened. That's nearly impossible.
Thank you.
Yes, just to clarify before we move on, the contact tracing only tells whether someone has been exposed to an infected person, not who the infected person caught it from. The infected person may have been in contact with 5 other people who could have transmitted it, or we may not know who they got it from. We only know who they then came in contact with afterwards. It's actually an issue that I've looked into a little bit, and it's very, very difficult to trace actual lines of transmission unless it's one of the very, very rapid onset diseases where you can actually say, okay, this person got sick, then this person, So you'll be on the list, Counselor. Counselor Fleming for the second time.
Yes, this will be short. This might be for Mr. Curry. So where this is a grant to the city of Fitchburg, is there going to be ID required to show that people who might be coming in for the vaccinations or the tests do live in the city, or is this just going to be open up to all the communities surrounding us so that we don't eat up these funds outside of Fitchburg?
It really depends on the funds used. If it's ARPA Fitchburg funds, it would be directly used only for Fitchburg.
So there will be some sort of identification needed to prove you live in the city?
No, the goal is to get people vaccinated. We're not looking for ID. ID oftentimes turns people away from getting vaccinated, especially if they don't want to be identified, if they're not a legal citizen.
So then how do we ensure that this is only going to Fitchburg residents and not Lunenburg or Westminster or Ashby or Leominster?
We would ask people to pre-register, and we would provide a link in advance so we can review whoever registers to get the vaccine. But we're really not at that point anymore.
Yeah.
We would be when boosters come around, the booster shots, but we would really deal with walk-ins, and we would have to take name and address, but we're not going to refuse an Ashburnham resident that comes to a Fitchburg clinic.
Okay, so I guess what I'm saying is that we could have mass groups of people just coming from other communities eating up what's meant for Fitchburg.
It could happen, yes.
Okay. That was my question, thank you, yeah.
Councilor Hughes?
Thank you, Mr. President. My question is for Mr. Skorsky again. I know in the past, the CDBG funding, they say a certain percentage for education, certain percentage for community-based projects, things like that. Is that the same formula that you would plan to use for this, or no?
So CDBG has 2 percentages that they tie to the funding. So 15% of it needs to be allocated towards public services, which are often the grants that we award to nonprofit agencies like the YMCA, Our Father's House, and the like. and then 20% for administration. But in this case, as we had mentioned, it's really just the lost revenue piece, and then the rest is really at the discretion of the local governments.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Councillor Green?
My question, getting back to mask mandates in the school, and that only applies to when they're in school. That doesn't, there's no mandate for before school daycare centers, after school daycare centers, any of our sports that take place, that there is a mask mandate during those times, correct?
That is correct. Not at this time.
So the clusters that we're seeing in school could be sparred from these other facilities or other groups where people are gathering where masks are not mandated.
It is quite possible, yes. Again, contact tracing is not looking for the point of transmission. Contact tracing is trying to identify people that are potential contacts to a confirmed case, that have the potential to develop symptoms and illness.
Right, I mean,
We remove them from groups in society for a period of time so that they do not have the ability to spread disease.
right, I don't want this to be a criticism, but if we're leaving money on the table that we haven't spent in this fiscal year, why aren't we getting you the employees that can do the contact tracing if that's where if that's where the gap is, or that's what needs the gap funding? Why aren't we doing that for you now?
We're working on that, but there needs to be a sort of a long-term plan in place, because it's not going away. The pandemic is still with us.
Right, so when we talked about the request for $500,000 for that fund, couldn't some of that be allocated now for you, and then?
Yes, that's the goal.
Okay, so are we actively looking for people who could, is it a special training that somebody needs for contact tracing employment?
Ideally would be a nurse, but we could hire contact tracers and train them, yes.
All right, thank you.
Councillor Gianatoli?
Very quickly, you said that, am I to understand that this is going to be treated like a free cash account, this ARPA funding? So every time, whatever channel determines what the recommendation is to the council, it'll go to city council for approval to expend the funds like it would be a grant program. Is that how I understand this?
Correct. I would say it would be similar to the block grant in that there would be a budget presented with a number of projects in it initially, which is not to say that we couldn't at the same time have individual projects that pop up along the way.
But I mean, there's a template at the start, and then obviously there's going to be amendments. It's going to be like its own mini budget.
Right. And we could conceivably be back here very quickly with some kind of a request on a project related to what Mr. Curry is talking about, hiring an epidemiologist or things like that we can go through the whole advisory committee, but given that we're getting this money because of COVID, a request to fight COVID is certainly top of the list.
But for the public's knowledge, it's going to be a transparent process, because every dime spent out of this is going to have a public hearing. Basically.
That's what the council's role is on that.
Right,
Yes, sir.
okay. I just wanted to make sure that was clear. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions or comments from councilors? Or questions in particular? All right, I have one of my own. The one thing I didn't hear anything about in this presentation was our first responders and public safety personnel. I'm sorry, other public safety personnel. I don't want to imply that the health department isn't engaged in public safety, but police and fire in particular, who have been on the front lines of this throughout the pandemic, including prior to any availability of vaccines and adequate PPE. To what extent do we have any eligibility to do something to, either retrospective or prospective for them? And to what extent do we intend to?
So back earlier in the year when the vaccines were released, we were able to get some grant funds. I combined with 10 other towns. At the time, we needed to come up with 800 first responders. So we got enough towns together to get clinics together to take care of the first responders. There really isn't a plan yet for boosters, but I will say that about 75% of our Fitchburg, maybe a little smaller, 75% in the fire and probably 50 to 60 in police have been vaccinated. We can continue to include public safety in our clinics, and we could actually go to them if the need is there.
Right, so I'm not actually asking about how we're going to vaccinate them going forwards. I'm talking about in terms of ARPA allocations. Is there any plan to allocate any of this funding to our public safety departments? To either as, whether it's premium pay or to improve their services going forwards, particularly, lost positions or anything like that.
Thank you, Counselor. As far as I'm aware, ARPA does not specify any direct funds to public safety other than what Mr. Curry just mentioned about addressing their public health needs. One item that you did mention is the potential for premium pay, and as we mentioned earlier, that is something that this team has talked a great deal about, particularly around how we might be able to implement such a program. And at this time, we do not have plans to implement such a program. There are a lot of strings that would be attached. There are caps on some of the spending ceilings that we can hit. And as Auditor Brooks had mentioned, he just returned from a trip with many of his counterparts from different cities and towns, and they also have no plans at this time to implement such a program. However, this committee is open to such a proposal if anyone would like to submit one, and it would be addressed accordingly to all of the other RFPs.
Thank you very much. If everyone has been heard, thank you to the committee, and we look forward to hearing from you in the future. And we will now return to our regularly scheduled agenda.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, people.
Thank you.
Thank you.
No comp time.
All right, next up, we have a report of the Economic Development Committee. Councillor Van Hazen.
Thank you, Mr. President.
I'm sorry, wait just a moment. It's the door. Oh, okay. Go ahead.
So on September 14th, 2021, the Economic Development Committee met to hear a single item, Order 16121, regarding a grant from Mass Development TDI Challenge in the amount of $45,000 for the purpose of targeting technological enhancements in the city's downtown parking system and implement accompanying signage changes. This is part of a larger effort to overhaul the city's parking system on Main Street and downtown. And the first phase of this plan is to remove the metered parking from Main Street and instead to institute time-limited parking as a way to support local businesses and visitors to the downtown area. And this would be monitored through license plate reader technology, LPR technology. And at a later date, as we track the usage of parking in downtown and the availability of spaces, once we reach a certain benchmark, we would institute, the plan would be to institute paid parking as a way to regulate parking and to encourage availability so that people can find spaces when they come to downtown and need it. But that's a future phase that would require additional equipment. And this is in conjunction with a similar order that was heard by the Finance Committee. And there was a lot of discussion. I would refer to the report of the committee to all the councilors to read. But generally there was support for the plan with the caveat that there were some questions about how the LPR technology works in practice. And the conclusion of the committee was to vote to, a unanimous vote to recommend approval. Was it unanimous?
It was not unanimous.
I'm sorry, it was a 4-to-1 vote to recommend approval, subject to further discussion at this meeting with some clarifying details on how the LPR technology would work.
Thank you. And because this does overlap with a finance matter, I'm going to, if there is no objection from councilors, I'm going to ask that we hold the vote on this until we have also received the report from finance. Seeing no objection, we will hear a report of the Finance Committee. Councilor Giannatalli.
Mr. President, I will just quickly say about the report, since there's so many items, that the committee voted to adopt, favorably recommend all orders plus 14421 resolution, with the exception of 16221 that was held in committee. But all other orders on the agenda were favorably recommended to the full city council.
Mr. President,
Councilor Boschman.
before we take a vote on this, I'd like to pull 144, 156, 157, and 158.
All right. So we have before us the report of the Finance Committee with respect to items 15221, 153, 154, 155, 159, and 160.
I call for a separate vote on 160 as well.
All right. 160. All right. So we have 152 through 155, and 159 and 162.
Move to accept the Finance Committee report.
Second.
I have a motion and second to accept the report of the Finance Committee. If there is no objection, we will take this under unanimous consent. Seeing no objection, it passes. At this time, because we just, no, I'm sorry, we'll address that separately. All right, we now have 14421 before the council.
Move to accept the resolution.
Second.
I have a motion and second to accept the resolution.
On the motion?
On the motion, Councilor Boschman.
I'm in favor of the motion. Don't get me wrong, but I still maintain that I believe that the New View should donate some money towards the park. That's how I feel. I felt that way from the very beginning, and I feel that way today. So that's how I feel. The New View should give some donation towards the low playground. And that's how I feel. And they can do things cheaper than what we can as a government. So.
Duly noted. I have a motion and second. If there is no objection, we will take this under unanimous consent. Seeing no objection, it passes. 15621.
Move to accept.
Second.
I have a motion and second.
On the
Councilor
motion.
Boschman, on the motion.
On the motion, 99.9% of the time, I vote for Mr. Kerry and his Board of Health. On this particular issue, I'm not going to support this. I believe that we're playing games. I think that this job should have been filled a long time ago, as the other positions in throughout the city. So I'm not supporting this, and my vote's no.
Councilor Giannatalli.
I just want to make sure the public understands, who may not have watched the meeting last week and not taking what Councilor Boschman said at face value, that the Board of Health Director, the Director of Health, explained in detail the logistical processes by which was employed from as early as April of this year to get this position online, and this is just a straight budgetary transfer. The position was posted in April. He received 30 applications. 2/3 of those applications right away were not qualified. There were 2 people interviewed, not selected, and there are 4 or 5 that we have reached out to for interviews who have not gotten back to us for who knows what reason. Maybe they got another job or something. And so the process continues. So in the meantime, this is to move money from personal services to expenses to keep going with the contractor until we get a position on board. So the process so far has taken 6 months because we have not yet been able to find someone qualified for the position, which is felt throughout the state and the federal landscape. That was what was communicated last week, and I wanted to make that clear this evening for the viewing public. Thank you.
Councilor Walsh?
Yeah, I just wanted to comment that my understanding was at the time that Mr. Curry stated that the person who was in this position had left in February, and I guess my concern is if they left in February, why wasn't this position advertised until April?
And it would be up to the moving counselor whether we withdraw the motion to ask that question.
I withdraw.
Any objection? Seeing none. Director Curry, would you like to address that briefly?
Could you repeat the question, councilors? I want to make sure I understood it correctly.
Thank you, and I may have misunderstood what you said originally. I thought you had said at the Finance Committee meeting that the person who was in that position had left in February. And I guess my question is, if that's true, why wasn't the position advertised until April?
You are correct. The position, I can't answer that. Wasn't posted till, I don't know the reason. It was turned into the Human Resources Department. I'm not sure of the date. There is also a possibility that I've experienced delays.
Okay, thank you. That's all I wanted to know. Thank you.
All right. Councilor Boschman?
In regards to, I understand it's very small money, it's only $15,000, but this goes on time and time and time again in all the departments, that we're dragging our feet and hiring people. And if I was looking for a job at the Board of Health and I got the interview and I didn't get back to you for months on end, of course I'm going to take another job somewhere else. I'm not going to wait forever, and you know that too. And we're not posting in a timely manner, and we're running a business here. We're not running something else. It's a business that we have to answer to the public, and I don't believe we're doing a good job. Thank you.
So, councilors, I will just note that this is actually not a net additional expenditure for the city. This is money that was budgeted for the for the employee, which is now being spent in the same amount for contractor. That's correct?
That is correct.
So this is not the only line item that this is being withdrawn from is the one that we are not using because we don't have someone employed. Councilor Giannatalli.
This is my second time, and I apologize. I want to make it crystal clear here that we have talked about this several times already. We had a committee meeting on this. We've had other departments explain why there are delays. And I try my best to keep my composure because I feel like I am deja vu every week in this council. We say the same things over and over again. Mr. Curry said that it's possible that it's because he was backed up and didn't get the rec in. Has that happened before? Okay, so I'm not here to cast judgment on you, Mr. Curry. I know you're very busy. What I'm trying to make clear to everybody is not everything is black and white. Not everything is going to go, oh, the inspector left on Tuesday, Mr. Curry's got the rec ready on Wednesday morning. That's not how it works. So, but even if it did, again, with the facts, and again, I'm repeating myself because it's not sinking in. 30 applications, 2/3 not qualified, 2 people interviewed, not picked, 4 or 5 called, not getting back to us. That's why this is happening. It's one thing if we haven't put a rec out until last week. The rec's been out there for almost 6 months. And now in other departments, that was stated earlier, the same problems are happening. We are having difficulty attracting and finding the right candidates for these highly specialized fields. So not everything is a straight line. In my own company, we are hemorrhaging manufacturing laborers. Can't find them. Maybe that's going to change now that the feds aren't paying people to stay home, but that's what's been going on the last 3 or 4 months. So it isn't a defense of the city's management, which I might add, We have no say in how things get hired here. This is a mayoral function, so if anything, he should be the one to talk about it. But beside that, this has been a uniform issue throughout the country. This is not because the city is sitting on its rear end, refusing to do any movements on hiring people. That is not the case. That has never been the case, yet it keeps getting stated as if it's fact, and unless we live in fantasy world, it isn't. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor, you indicated you do actually have something to say about this.
Thank you, Mr. President. I find myself compelled to explain that maligning the HR department in the city of Fitchburg is getting very tiresome. All right? Let me give you some rundown as to how posting a job, how that all begins and ends, and the challenges that exist to get to that point. All right? First of all, the HR department in the city of Fitchburg deals with 460 employees, 340 full-time, the rest part-time. That's not counting 900 plus individuals in the school department with us maintaining our workers' compensation issues. 2 people in that department, 2. Let me give you some examples of why jobs don't get filled like this, Counselor. You're dealing with someone who's lost. We have the position because the individual has not left willingly. All right? So there are legal issues that compound things that don't happen overnight. We deal with closing out any potential outstanding issues with the previous employee. Could include leave of absences, potential union issues, potential lawsuits. Posting, working with the department and hiring manager on job descriptions, working with the department and hiring manager on where to post positions to maximize potential applicants. Allowing for adequate time for the posting to maximize the potential individuals. Interviewing, working with the department heads, the hiring managers, and search committee members to determine which candidates, if any, to interview. Again, this may first start with an internal review and then separate external reviews as well. If no candidates are deemed to be qualified, the entire process begins over again. If availability of all parties, when you interview, going through the interview process, you have to coordinate with the department head. When can they make it? Can they review the job descriptions and the candidates that have been come forward? Hiring, negotiating with the candidate, department head and hiring manager on salary and benefits, conducting pre-employment screenings, sometimes including physical and drug screening. Again, 2 people. 400 people. 900 just for workers' compensation. So I hope that when I come back to you during budget time, you'll approve me for an additional HR person. Hopefully you won't tell me it's specious. The HR department does a hell of a job. They don't need to be maligned that way. Thank you.
Mr. President.
Counselor, I'm sorry, you've spoken twice.
I can't address him?
Nope.
Motion to approve 15621.
Second.
I have a motion and second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? 1 in opposition. Motion passes. 15721. Order that there be and hereby is transferred from within the sum of $25,000. Same to be transferred from reserve for other municipal expenses, reserved for other municipal purposes, capital expenses, and credited to community development expenses, downtown cleanup. Councilor Giannatalli.
Mr. President, I think 158 needs to be in tandem with this because if I recollect, these 2 are connected in that this was a mere accounting amendment. That was it.
Good call, Councilor.
We're basically just swapping between the accounts.
Yes, so 157 and then 15821, order that there be and hereby is transferred from within the sum of $25,000, same to be transferred from CDBG Year 47 Downtown Cleanup Program and credited to CDBG Year 47 Streetscapes Project. And I will, thank you for reminding me, Councilor, I will note for the council that this is, and correct me if I'm saying this wrong, but this is basically an issue where we discovered that $25,000 worth of projects that we had allocated one funding stream to were not in fact eligible for that funding stream. So all we're doing is moving that $25,000 to something it is eligible for, and then pulling from that other part to carry out what the $25,000 was originally allocated for. It's a net zero transfer. All the same amount of money will be spent on all the same things. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Councillor Boschman.
I just want to verify one thing. That's not correct. The correctness was when we were at this council talking about the CBG fund for the sum of $50,000, right there, that guy in the corner office right over there told me if I voted for it at $50,000, River Street would be included in it. Now, River Street is no longer included in it. I voted at the financial meeting that I was going to pass this. But then I felt, when I went home that night, I felt like a hypocrite, and I still feel like a hypocrite, that River Street should be included, that we allocated $50,000.
Councillor, I understand how you feel about this, but this is not ultimately a vote on whether the project should go forward or whether the money should go towards it. This is simply a vote to make the books line up. The project is already approved.
I understand it, but it was approved for River Street, and Mr. Scambrossi said they're not going to do River Street. They're only doing Main Street.
Yes, and that is not what we're voting on, though.
I understand, and that's why I'm not going to allocate that money to change.
Okay.
I feel that way.
Councillor Squalia.
As Councillor Boschman noted, there was originally $50,000. Did we use $25,000 for other purposes that are eligible for the CDBG downtown cleanup program, and we're just allocating like half of that out?
So Reimagine North of Main submitted a request for $50,000 for funding. Ultimately, our recommendation to the planning board's recommendation to the council, and what you had voted on was for $30,000. But then that was amended further when we received a reduced allocation from HUD, which we made the determination that this was the best place to remove funding from. As you know, you all know the other projects we're funding in the community with CDBG funding. So it was $25,000 as originally approved by the council and then reduced by my department.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Motion to approve 157 and 158.
Second.
I have a motion and second. On the motion, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? One in opposition. Motion passes. We now have 160 and 16121, which I would like to combine. Oh yes, 16121. Sorry, 160 through 16221. They're all no, I'm sorry, 160 and 161. I was right the first time. We'll take those together if there is no objection. 16121 is out of economic development, and 16021 is out of finance. But they address the same fundamental issue.
Make a motion, we accept.
Second. I would like to hear Mr. Skorowski's responses to our questions from the committees.
I have a motion and second. It is up to the moving councillor.
Oh, I get that. Go ahead, Tom.
All right, motion, if there is no objection, motion will be withdrawn. Seeing no objection.
I thank you.
Skorowski?
So I heard a lot of great questions from both committees related to privacy, related to how we are going to outreach to folks who didn't have access to technology. Immediately after that meeting, I reached out to Ventec, the vendor we'd be working with. We also do have David Trudeau from Ventec on the line, I believe. I don't quite know how that works, but I think he's in the waiting room. In the event there are more questions, I admire his patience this evening. But just to answer a few of them, so how is the information stored? How secure is the system? License plates are secured, the information secured on an AWS secured server, that's the Amazon Web Services. Only the plate number and image is stored, and it's ultimately up to the city how long we store it, generally for 30 to 60 days for analytic purposes. And then the letter goes on as submitted in the council packet to outline the security of that system. And it's a cloud-based, extremely secure system. Then there was a question about what they call hot lists, which, license plates don't just tell you how long somebody's parked there, right? They tell you if a car is stolen. They tell you a host of other to criminal complaints. And that's a separate module and not one we have purchased or aim to purchase, I should say, through this program. Will Ventec be selling any of the data? They will not collect or use any client data. And then this next one, is there a way for residents to purchase permits through the software without going online? There is not, and as discussed in the meeting, the compromise was really to call city services, the parking clerk's office, of course, and Ann and her team are great and could help work within that software to get folks a permit. The other additional factor I did not mention at the meeting last week is the parking garage at Putnam has a kiosk there currently. And we do plan to keep that kiosk, and that kiosk actually links with this system. So we'll still be able to retain in the Putnam Street kiosk the ability for folks to walk up, slide a card, and purchase additional parking. And that's something we'll be working with. So actually, it's really a two-pronged solution. They can call us at City Hall, or they can be directed through signage to the Putnam Street garage. So really, it will be a net zero change in how those folks will access parking downtown. Because currently, you don't need technology to park on street, nor will you in the future. The Mill Street parking garage is 2 hours free parking currently. It will still be that way in the future. And really, if you want to get any permits above and beyond that, you need to go to City Hall already today. So no net change there. And then Putnam Street, again, given the kiosk will still be there, there won't be a change there as well. And then there's questions, is a vehicle parked on a location on the block and moves to another location on the same block? Will it be considered in violation? And that's ultimately up to us and what our ordinance prescribes, and we can set the technology to match that ultimately. So those were the questions as I heard them. If they have not been addressed in the packet, Mr. Trudeau is here this evening, and thanks again, David, for joining us.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Trudeau. I appreciate your patience through this rather long meeting. I have at the moment Councillor Fleming.
Yeah, so I just believe I just heard that regarding the data that Fitchburg can decide when they want to delete the data, but
Correct.
Amazon is also collecting the data. And I'm not that proficient with technology, but my question is, how long do they keep it? Do they keep it forever, like in the cloud? So,
No, they don't.
okay. When do they delete it?
Basically, if you require the data to be deleted after 30 days, it's deleted from the cloud.
So would there be signage stating that? Will people know that their data is being collected when they use the kiosk?
So
that would be up to the city.
So ultimately, it's a local determination if we'd like to have the signage indicate that. I suppose to some degree it's implied, but we could certainly add that. I mean, there'll be cameras as you're driving into the parking garage that will take your license plate, and we could have signage if desired to indicate that the cameras are there for that purpose.
Okay, I don't think people know that data is being collected on them in general. Your generation may know that. My generation isn't completely proficient in that, so I believe signage is necessary, and maybe information put out on the city website explaining what that means.
It's going to require a public information campaign above and beyond signage, to be sure. I mean, we're completely changing the way that we work our current parking system, and that's going to require collaboration with the mayor's office, the treasurer's office, as the parking clerk, of course, and my office. And we certainly intend to make sure everybody is aware of the changes well before they happen.
Yeah, and there was some reference made to comparing us to Somerville and Boston. Well, we're not Somerville and Boston, we're still small city Fitchburg. And we got to keep that in mind when we advance things to a point that we want to be like Boston. We're, you know, we're a great city, we're a small city, we're not Boston or Somerville.
I think the comparison was made just to show that this is a system widely utilized throughout the country. And of course, even the intermodal station here in Fitchburg uses Ventec LPR technology as well. So I think that was the point we were trying to make, not trying to draw those linkages or anything like that.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Other counselors?
I want a question.
Counselor Brochman.
I got one thing to say. Tom, I'm hoping that we don't spend any more additional money on signages. I mean, that's where all the money goes on stupid things like signages and everything else. If you just tell them, I mean, we go to Mass Fifth Turnpike and you go to the thing and they take a picture of your camera, what the hell is the difference? Really? I mean, you go to a lot of places and they take your camera. I mean, we're making a big project out of something very small. Really? You're going in there to use the garage to take a picture. Right, I wanted to take a picture because we were going through red lights. You know, so don't spend the money that we have to spend. Don't start putting signs everywhere. Right, people don't read the signs anyway. You get stop signs, they go through them. So what's the difference?
Counselors, it's not just you. I'm addressing the entire council. If I'm understanding correctly, all of these finer policy details in terms of how are we going to use this data, what signage are we going to post, that will come before us at a later date.
All right.
This grant money is, we're approving it to get the ball rolling, to get the process started. And then when it comes time to actually amend our ordinances, that will then come before us, and we can debate exactly how we want to do it, what provisions we want to include, how we want to roll it out to the public, and so on.
And I would add, I defer to the subject matter experts at Ventec, and that will be part of this as we, work with them and we sign a contract, we get going with the procurement process, is figuring out how do other communities handle signage, because there is a practical component here where people do need to know what the system is in place, and I think signage probably will play a role. So that's something we'll be working on with Ventec.
Did I see a hand from Councillor Van Hazinga?
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. I do think it's worthwhile clarifying in regards to the storage of the data, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but this data is just being hosted by Amazon Web Services. This is not being analyzed by Amazon. It's not being used to craft shopping recommendations. They merely have the server bandwidth to host this, to basically just hold this type of data that is then being processed by our contractor. Is that correct?
That's accurate.
Correct.
I can confirm that as well. The company that my father operates, Research Results, has operated on an AWS cloud server for almost a decade now. Amazon itself as a company has no access to the data. I suppose theoretically they could, but it would be against all the contracts and all the legal provisions that apply. They are just a server. They're just holding the data the same way as when you put up a website, whatever hosting service you use has your data, but you're the only one who actually accesses it. So Amazon as a company, Amazon.com won't have access to the data. I have Councillor Councillor Van Hazinga, a follow-up?
Yes, and also I think it's important to acknowledge that this technology is a mature technology. It's not experimental, it's not cutting edge. This is a mature technology that is used across the state, across the country, in many different communities. And any new parking garage or parking area that's constructed basically uses this technology. That the intermodal garage is the newest garage in Fitchburg. It uses LPR technology in these kiosks to manage it. Parking meters are old-fashioned. They're not modern. They're not put into place now. They are relics of a previous way of doing things. So I think this is something that is already in use in the city. The Fitchburg Police Department additionally uses LPR technology and has for many years. There are already scanners in the city that are reading license plates and doing these things. So this is not something new. This is just a change that will help our parking system in downtown function better. And it will help support businesses and visitors to downtown better. That's all it is.
Thank you. Councilor Squalia.
Thank you. I'm concerned about this system for a number of reasons. Spending, $75,000 plus $45,000 now on this system, the recurring $7,000 per year cost, the plan to spend $400,000 on this, entire parking improvement plan. It feels like we're spending money on a solution to a problem that doesn't currently exist. And I'm concerned with the Ventec Intec company. They get a percentage or a dollar amount for every ticket that we issue. So they have a direct incentive to increase the amount of tickets that the city issues. Is there any direct correlation there? Is it all 100% on the city itself? To determine the ticket issuing? Is the company suggesting tickets to issue to increase that revenue?
The statement regarding ticket revenue in part going to Ventec, and David, I guess you could jump in here first, and then I don't want to state something incorrectly. So, David, it's my understanding that that is not the case. Is that correct?
From my understanding is that you're using a separate company for your citation issuing. At Ventec, we have a ticketing system that is basically a flat fee. We do not charge per citation.
I believe what you might be referring to is the permit system that we'll be entering that will allow for permits to be registered online. There is a $1 per transaction fee associated with that, but not for tickets.
And that's just, no, not for citations themselves.
So if someone goes online to the app system and does the permit because they want to park for 3 hours, then Ventec gets $1 per transaction for that.
Well, basically, the online permitting system would be used for long-term permits, week, month, year. The kiosks or a smartphone application would be best suited for somebody that wants to park, 2-3 hours. And there's a number of smartphone companies out there that are very reasonable. They supply signage, and the one that I've been using recently charges, I believe, a 25-cent convenience fee. And for people that are using it more often, they do have an inexpensive monthly fee.
And I would just add, we are looking at an all-day pass that one could purchase, similar to what we do today, and perhaps a half-day. This is part of the consultation we'll be working with locally. Today, you can only park in the Mill Street garage for 2 hours. You can park in the Putnam garage for longer than that, and that will remain fully utilized using that kiosk system. And I guess to the other point of a problem that, we're looking for a solution for a problem that does not exist, with the $400,000 planned investment, of which this is a fourth of it, ultimately, it's part of the phased effort. The goal here is to phase in a system, so this is really the first phase. I would agree, we don't have a need currently to implement $400,000 worth of parking kiosks throughout our on-street downtown, because we're at about 30% capacity, but the goal will be to set us up for success when we get to a place where we are fully utilizing our parking system. When we get to 75, 85%, then we know that will be a problem that does exist and we need to find a solution for. I think the primary solution we needed to find today is how do we remove the meters on Main Street, because they're a detriment to business. And in so doing, how do we have a system for enforcement that is constitutional, number one, because you can't chalk tires anymore, that's deemed unconstitutional, but also number two, efficient and effective. So what we heard from businesses is it's great to remove the meters, but it won't be great if people just park there all day. So they still want enforcement. They want turnover. So that's the problem we're addressing today. But certainly in the future, we're trying to build ourselves into that phased solution that will be data-based and data-informed.
Thank you. So my last question is for maintenance of the system. And, you know, the last parking kiosk we put in, it cost a lot of money, thousands of dollars, and it was broken soon after. Do we have an idea of potential damage, maintenance costs for potential damage to any of our equipment, our cameras, or our license plate reader technology, anything like that?
So certainly the difference now from when we had that kiosk on Mill Street is the entire Mill Street garage has cameras, which would hopefully act as a deterrent. The Putnam Street garage, you know, still does have its kiosk, and I think cameras probably play a role in helping to police and monitor that. I guess, you know, the replacement would be the cost of the items themselves. So, you know, we're looking at, you know, David, what are the costs for the fixed systems exactly? When I pull my numbers up, maybe you can get them before I do.
I'm on my cell phone, not in front of a computer, sorry.
Apologies, I've got about 8 agenda items tonight, so I'm just kind of going between them all. But let's just say roughly $40,000, 30 to 40 for the replacement of the fixed cameras. But of course, you know, they'll be at different entrances and exits. You know, that's certainly why we're not putting a new kiosk in today at the Mill Street garage. We didn't feel like that was a good investment because that would be a problem or a solution for a problem that doesn't exist. The problem again today is just making sure we have efficient enforcement that will allow us to ramp up and scale up if and when we need it.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Councilor Giannatalli.
Why can't, I'm all up with the latest technology. I just don't understand, you know, because I was in Worcester, parts of Boston. There's many garages that do not use this system. Why can't we just have a system where you go to the gate, you press the button, out spits out the ticket, and then there's a menu on the front that says how many hours you stay, whatever, and then before you exit, you can't leave until you put the ticket in and then pay the fee and then leave. Wouldn't that be a lot easier, especially for all age categories to understand and less maintenance? I'm not so much trying to knock the system, I don't understand why we can't just do that. Why is that not an option? Why is this the preferred option for the garages?
I would just say it's the preferred option today. You could certainly move into some, you know, additional hardware that we purchased to help supplement the system. But what I would say is I don't think that's easier for senior citizens. I think it's easier to just drive into the lot and park and know that you have 2 hours to be there. You know, I've seen many of people who have got to open their door and get out the car to grab the ticket because they didn't pull up close enough. And then I see backups that ensue accordingly, and especially now we'll have 2-way traffic. So it does allow for quicker in and out. And what the other thing it allows for that system does not is if you have a permit, you can just drive in. You don't have to worry about a ticket period. Our enforcement team doesn't have to worry about you know, those tickets as well. So
My concern is we're putting the cart before the horse, where we're spending a lot of money to implement this kind of a system, while in tandem, I think I said this at the committee meeting, we're trying to get to a goal of 85% usage of our parking garages, and we're only at like 25%. So we've got a long ways to go, but we're going to implement this system to begin with. I almost feel like as long as we can prove that we're making progress on utilizing the garages by continuing to redevelop the downtown, then the system would come after that. We're putting all this money up front into a system with a heavily underutilized parking garage, possibly because we're not fully redeveloped down here yet. We got a lot more work going on. And once all that redevelopment happens, the thought process is more people will come to downtown and use those garages. So I'm just concerned about meeting that benchmark of 85% or even 65%, but we've thrown all the investment into those garages way up front, way ahead. So that's all. I mean, I don't know how I feel about this, because I guess I want to see the dividends first before we implement a system like this that spends a lot of money, not to mention the annual maintenance. You know, a lot of these places we're talking about, they've already got the bones set. They've already got people using those garages. Here, we're trying to get the use of those garages. I'd like to see the use go up first before we implement a revolutionary system in terms of, for this city, we haven't used before. That's all.
Mr. Skorowski, could you confirm my understanding that both this system and the parking utilization targets apply not only to the garages, but also to all the currently metered spaces in the downtown area?
Yeah, and I'm not for meters. Believe me, I'm perfectly fine getting rid of the meters. I haven't been entirely sold on this system. And I think part of my hesitancy is because of the upfront investment while the parking garages are heavily underutilized. I don't think there's anything we can do about that, because only time will tell. All this redevelopment will foster that interest, but we're not there yet. So we're way ahead. We're early. You know. So.
David, do you have anything to add?
I understand that gated systems are acceptable in a lot of cities, but the main concern that I have with gated cities or gated garages is the fact that people do lose their tickets. The mornings, it causes traffic jams heading into the garage. If somebody loses their ticket on the way out at rush hour, you can look at 20 or 30 cars waiting to get out, and just people getting angry. Excuse me. You're saying that you don't see a lot of the cameras in garages. That is changing. I'd have to say, 70% of all the quotes that we're sending out right now are for fixed and mobile LPR cameras, and that's across North America. Again, the choice is yours, but I see it as a major benefit down the road for you. People will be used to having the cameras in place. That's about all I can say on that. Sorry.
And I would add, we do have a gate in the Mill Street Boulder Drive entrance. That gate had been damaged and it was cost prohibitive to replace. In this instance, I did pull up, while David was talking, the cost of each individual fixed kit. It's roughly $4,990 per camera. Then ultimately, we do have multiple cameras deployed at various entrances and exits, but it's a lot more cost-effective of a solution than a gate, which, if we were going for 1 or 2 gates, that might have taken up this entire budget.
What's the time frame here? So if we vote for this tonight, what happens?
If we vote for this tonight, we work on our contract with Ventec. We have them come in, and David, there's another area, you feel free to step in. They do kind of an audit of our system and give us the full, we have a quote, but this would be the full recommendation of all the improvements needed, how we would phase it in, et cetera. The most important date for me would be that this gets accomplished when the main Boulder project is done, and hopefully well before that, which will be around May to June, optimistically. So we want to have this in place because we're going to lose parking on Boulder Drive. We want to open up access to the Boulder Drive entrance of the Mill Street garage, but also, of course, just I've been wanting to get rid of the meters since the day I walked in this building.
So the cake is baked after tonight? There's no possibly, there's no likely, it's a done deal after tonight?
So the cake is somewhat baked, but it needs to have some icing put on it, and that will be the counselors, when you vote on the ordinance changes we'll have to make here.
Will the icing choice change the system?
If there's no icing, there's no system.
Do we still get cake?
What, okay.
I'm really lost.
Since I clearly, by the looks of me, I like food, what is the icing in this cake, in this case then? Because you just said you're going to move forward with the contractual commitments. What's the icing then? The system's going in.
So, for the record, cream cheese icing is my preference. So ultimately, we negotiate a contract. We can work out the phasing of the project. We could come back here for the final ordinance vote before we purchase the equipment, ostensibly.
All right. Thank you.
Councilor Brochman.
I just want to say, I can understand what you're saying, Tom, and what the man's saying, because I'm one of those guys that went into UMass Medical and used the parking garage, and they grabbed that ticket, like Mr. Dean Natale, Councilor Dean Natale said. Well, that same guy, on the way out, had a heck of a time putting the ticket in the right way so the gate would go up, and the guy behind me is tooting the horn, and the other guy swearing behind him, because this guy didn't know what he was doing. And that was the problem. I like this system here where you just drive in and drive out. I know I look like a fool, but I'm just telling the truth. That happened. And the guy next to me had the same problem, so I don't feel bad. So it does. I am one of those people that you do have a hard time with the ticket putting in the right way because you're worried about the guy behind you, and it won't go in the slot. You're trying because he's got it all crumpled. So I understand what you're saying. I agree. I'll go with you, Tom.
Well, there you have it. Testimony from a genuine senior citizen of Fitchburg. Councilor Van Hazinga.
Thank you, Mr. President. Actually, first for the record, I agree with the cream cheese frosting. If it's not appropriate, a nice buttercream is good too, but cream cheese is my preference. But I think the major benefit of enacting these changes are the management of the on-street parking. That the garages aren't going to change that much in practice of how they're operating now. The kiosk in the Putnam Street garage, that will remain there. Mill Street will basically mirror the management of the on-street parking. So, and I'd like to talk about why it's important to get rid of the meters and change the system. Use an example right across the street. We have Joey's Barber Shop right across the street up there. I was actually just there yesterday with Joey getting my haircut. He has a lot of residents, a lot of older residents. There's no convenient off-street parking right there, so people depend on on-street parking. And a lot of elderly residents want to park right in front of the building because they can't walk very far. They don't want to cross 2 lanes of a busy main street. And often they forget to feed the meter. And Joey tries to remind them, he tries to give them quarters, but sometimes they forget and they come out after paying $10 for their haircut and have a $15 parking ticket on their car, which Joey often pays out of his pocket. And he only made $10 on that haircut, and he's paying $15 for a ticket. And that's it makes it hard for local businesses that depend on volume, that depend on short visits of people coming in, getting a product, getting a service, spending money, and then leaving. You need to have convenient parking, and the meters make it much harder, and we need to get rid of them. But the problem is, once we get rid of them, we still need to manage the parking spaces, because in some areas of Main Street, there is demand for parking, especially at the lower end. If you're at Steve DeVarney's jewelry store down at the lower end of Main Street, there's a lot of demand for parking, because there's apartments down there, there's a lot of offices, there's a lot of stores, and a lot of the time those on-street spaces are filled. And if you don't have some way of limiting the time someone is at a metered space, they'll be full all the time. So my wife's grandmother wants to go down to visit Steve and get a piece of jewelry. She can't park in front of the store because there are cars there from the apartments nearby that have been there all day and have been there all weekend. And there's no way to regulate that. The LPR technology allows us to preserve the availability of parking, but to make it not a hassle, to make it easy. You don't have to do anything. You don't need spare change. You don't need to do anything other than park and not stay more than 2 hours. This is what makes it possible. And this is what will help support local businesses to be more successful, to be more inviting to people who are looking to invest in the city and are looking for a place to have their store or to have their office. This makes downtown more inviting, it makes it easier to visit, and it makes it easier to have a business and to invest money into the city. This is a change we should be making. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Fleming.
This may have been asked and answered, and my apologies if it was. The initial investment is $75,000. What is the continuing fee, yearly fee, to maintain this?
So the total maintenance costs here are about $7,000, $7,100. And this was mentioned at the Economic Development Committee meeting. The second piece is, if we're getting rid of the meters bring revenue into the city. And the council will need to determine, and this is something where the icing will, I forget how the metaphor went, but when the zoning, or when the ordinance itself to change everything is made, a recommendation I had made is that Finance Committee consider how we either recoup that source of revenue, or if we make the determination, it's about $45,000 in coin meters in total, not just including Main Street, but all the meters throughout downtown. How we want to either recoup that through additional revenue sources, or if that's just a determination, we want to subsidize that cost for a period of time to support downtown business. You know, I could go either way on it. I think there's great arguments in both directions, but there's about $7,000 of maintenance costs, and then there's that cost that we do need to consider.
So this would not be something that eventually we would increase the taxes to maintain the system?
Unless one were to consider the permit fees a tax. And then ultimately, of course, as we do work into a pay-to-park system, as it's more fully utilized, that would bring in revenue. Ultimately, that would be the goal.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Further questions? Councilor Schultz.
Yeah, I was just going to make a statement in agreement with Councilor Van Hazinger that if we are promoting Main Street, and we think that Main Street eventually, with all the, like the mayor says, we've got $200 million of investment in the pipeline, if we think we're going to reach that development of Main Street, then I think we should look to invest now in a technology that will prepare us for the future. So I'm in full agreement with what Councilor Van Hazinger said, and I hope we do pass these two petitions. Thank you.
Thank you. And I will also agree, both in general and with respect to Joey's Barbershop in particular. I've been going there since he was over on Mill Street, and I am one of the people who has gotten a parking ticket for forgetting to feed the meter while waiting for my haircut. So it is very inconvenient for downtown business because, you know, we do have that free parking on the other side at the island there, but that's not really a convenient place to park for someone who's coming, you know, who's 70 some odd and has been going to Joey's since they were in their 50s. You know, and the same applies to other Main Street businesses. It's especially further down Main Street where there isn't even any free parking, where we have several new businesses that we want to succeed. Most people don't carry change these days. It's just not a thing anymore. I only have change on me if I have specifically made an effort to fill the console of my car with change just in case. But otherwise, you know, there's no reason for it. So we want to make going downtown and patronizing business downtown an easy, smooth process for people. And this is a major step in that direction, one that I have had requested to me by numerous residents and business owners for quite some time.
I'll make a motion we accept.
Second.
Motion and second to accept. This is on, just to confirm, 160 and 161.
Yeah.
On the motion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? 2 in opposition. Motion passes. We now have 16221. Order that the City of Fitchburg hereby approves the expenditure of funds from the Commonwealth of Massachusetts Community Compact Best Practices Program. I'm sorry?
Mr. President, that was already approved to be held.
Oh, I'm sorry, it was. You're correct. Thank you.
We approve to hold.
Yep.
Yeah.
Thank you. All right. Report of the Public Safety Committee. Councilor Green.
Yes, thank you. I still want cake. Our committee
Is there a
met...
second for the motion?
Our committee met this evening. We had one agenda item before us, 16621. Councilor Bernie Schultz and Amy Green to amend the code of the City of Fitchburg, Section 169, no parking on Ellis Street as outlined in the enclosed petition. That has been changed for the signs to read no parking from no parking anytime to no parking Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. to 10 a.m., and 2 p.m. to 4 p.m., and that was granted.
Councilor Squalia.
Thank you. This mirrors the original petition that we did approve, right? And for some reason, the signs got changed to all day. So this corrects that?
Yes, nothing else changes. The 350 feet down Ellis Street will remain in place, and the signage on Drury Lane and Kingsbury will stay the same.
Make a motion, we accept.
Second.
Motion and second. If there is no objection, we will take this by unanimous consent. Seeing no objection, motion passes. We have an order which will be forwarded to Finance.
Move for suspension on 17021.
Second.
All right. Motion for suspension. Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Counselor Walsh?
Yes.
President Zarella?
Yes.
Counselor Boishman?
Yes.
Counselor Kuchar?
Yes.
Counselor Di Natale?
Yes.
Counselor Fleming?
Yes.
Counselor Green?
Yes.
Counselor Hughes?
Yes.
Counselor Schultz?
Yes.
Counselor Squalia?
Aye.
Counselor Van Hazinga?
Yes.
That is unanimous.
Move 17021 be accepted.
Second.
I have a motion and second to accept 17021, that the City of Fitchburg hereby approves the expenditure of funds from the Massachusetts Department of Fire Services grant in the approximate amount of $1,800 for the purpose of said grant, which is to maintain the safe trailer which is used in teaching fire safety. Speaking on the motion, if there are no objections, we'll take this by unanimous consent. Seeing none, it is approved. I have received a request for suspension of the rules on 171 through 17421.
So moved. Second.
Motion and second for suspension of the rules on those 4 items. Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Counselor Walsh?
Yes.
President Zarella?
Yes.
Counselor Boishman?
Yes.
Counselor Kuchar?
Yes.
Counselor Di Natale?
Yes.
Counselor Fleming?
Yes.
Counselor Green?
Yes.
Counselor Hughes?
Yes.
Counselor Schultz?
Yes.
Counselor Squalia?
Aye.
And Counselor Van Hazinga?
Yes.
That is unanimous.
All right. We do need to take these separately because one of them requires a separate vote. So 17121, ordered that whereas the city and the City of Leominster have entered into an easement agreement to facilitate the development of the Leominster wastewater disposal system in exchange for the consideration of $8,680, and whereas the amount of the consideration is considered to be the fair market value of the interest conveyed, now therefore it is ordered that the City of Fitchburg shall, through its mayor, Stephen L. Di Natale, approve and authorize the execution and delivery of the grant of easement attached hereto between the city and the City of Leominster, and to authorize all other acts and documents which will be necessary, helpful, or convenient to effectuate and secure the completion of the easement deed. Solicitor Pusateri.
Thank you, Mr. President. This is Mr. Kettle's petition from the airport, and I see he's not here tonight, so I'd like you to take us through very quickly about what I know about it. City of Leominster contacted the City of Fitchburg Airport Commission looking to have access towards, to put in a line for the wastewater treatment. And in compliance with the FAA regulations, we sent that out fair market value. City Leominster paid for that. They quantified the fair market value to be that $8,680 figure. We kind of hemmed over it a little bit. We thought perhaps it might be a little low. I mean, we could go out and get our own another value, but we would be spending about $8,600 to get another value. So what we decided is that we would present that to the FAA, that we're going to move forward and convey a portion of the airport real estate for a non-aviation purpose. They have no objection to it. This is part of a theme that we're going to get into probably in the next couple of orders. Being good neighbors, we're going to ask that you approve this so that they can begin their project. Thank you.
Thank you. So just to confirm, this is an easement, not a land transfer, and this is for the installation of wastewater utilities? So
Yes.
this will be underground?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Councilor Green?
Are they utilizing the parcel closest to Nashua River?
I'm sorry, are they utilizing
Are they utilizing the parcel that's closest to the Nashua River for the grant of this easement? Is that the property?
I believe they're coming right off of Airport Road or Crawford Street, and they're headed straight north towards the wastewater treatment place.
Are they going to utilize our wastewater treatment plant?
I'm not exactly sure what their plan is, but I believe that that's the case. I'm not 100% sure, though.
What will that do for our impact of?
I don't know anything about the impact on the sewer system I don't know if they're going to use the wastewater treatment plant. Like I said, this is something that Mr. Kettle was working out with the city of Leominster. I expect him to
Counselor,
present it tonight.
I may be misremembering because it's been a year or two since I talked to wastewater about their facility and about the utilization by surrounding communities, but I believe we are compensated by the surrounding communities for any wastewater that is processed through our plant.
Will this come before us when we get that information? Or this is just, we're just granting the easement for them to do this?
They just asked for the easement. It's a piece of property that the airport owns, and do you have any information on that?
Yes, so the way that the wastewater division works is when surrounding cities and towns send us their flow, they do so under an intermunicipal agreement. We hold those types of agreements with Westminster, Leominster, and a few other communities. In this case, I believe that the sewer line that's being installed by Leominster is actually for the purposes of conveying sewer flows to their plant and not to Fitchburg's East Wastewater Treatment Plant. This particular parcel is, if you're familiar with where Local Roots, I think it's called Local Roots. It's like a food sandwich shop on Crawford Street. So it's across Airport Road on the other side from the airport, close to the railroad tracks. So I think they're doing a sewer improvement project in that neighborhood, and those flows are going to their plant and not the city's plant. That's what I understand.
And it's on land that we own in Leominster.
Right. It's on city-owned land in Leominster, and the airport is listed as the city owner, I believe.
Okay. Thank you.
Make a motion, we accept.
Second.
I have a motion and second to accept. If there is no objection, we'll take this by unanimous consent. Seeing none, motion passes. 17221, which will require a roll call vote because it authorizes special legislation. This is approving the filing of special legislation which authorizes the use of a certain portion of the parcel of lands described in the enclosed order for the purposes of construction of a water or wastewater system for the town of Westminster.
Good evening. Let me just start off if I can. Oh, absolutely. So you have two matters before you. One is going to be special legislation, and that's primarily for the purpose of allowing us to remove a small sliver of land from the protections of Article 97, which is conservation protections that citizens of the Commonwealth enjoy in land that's preserved for environmental purposes and other purposes. So that's why you have two, and I guess I interrupted you, so you want to speak to just the general request to make the conveyance?
Sure, absolutely. Westminster is planning a road improvement project on Route 140 from the Princeton town line up to about 1.6 miles into Westminster, basically that curvy section. Of course, the city of Fitchburg has Wachusett Reservoir as well as Wyman's Reservoir there, and abutting properties that we own. So for that project, they need to do some drainage improvements and install new drainage structure, particularly at where Wachusett Reservoir flows into Wyman's. There's a culvert that desperately needs to be replaced and floods there. So for that work, they need to do some work on the city of Fitchburg property that's a temporary easement, just regrading, maybe some removable trees and things like that, putting in drainage, swales and things like that. That's about 12,600 square feet of temporary easements, but they also need about 1,600 square feet, which is really a small amount of permanent easements, for, say, a drainage structure. I think it's partly for that culvert, some of that onto the city of Fitchburg property. We're wholly in favor of it because any improvements to the road is going to reduce salt usage in the winter. It'll be easier to maintain. And that culvert pipe has been just a headache for us because we need to regulate Wyman's Pond up and down particularly in the spring when there's snow melt off Wachusett Mountain because that culvert backs up. So this project, even though it's not in Fitchburg, it will be benefiting the water division as far as helping to protect the watershed and also eliminate those issues at that culvert pipe. In exchange, Westminster actually has a property that they took under tax title. It's about 0.65 acre that's in the watershed to Meeting House Reservoir, and they're going to, convey that to us at no cost. So it's significantly larger than any of the easements that we'll do, and it will forever protect that land. We'll make sure that, that no development occurs on that, and it's fairly close to one corner of our one leg of Meeting House Reservoir, which is the terminal reservoir to our regional treatment plant. So it's a win for us as far as, getting that property and protecting it. So the Water and Wastewater Commission did meet earlier this week on Monday and unanimously approved the easement. So we did have that vote. They were, wholeheartedly in favor of it. So if there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Move to accept 17221.
Second.
Motion and second for 17221. Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Counselor Walsh?
Yes.
President Zarella?
Yes.
Counselor Boishman?
Yes.
Counselor Kuchar?
Yes.
Counselor Di Natale?
Yes.
Counselor Fleming?
Yes.
Counselor Green?
Yes.
Counselor Hughes?
Yes.
Counselor Schultz?
Yes.
Counselor Squalia?
Aye.
Counselor Van Hazinga?
Yes.
That is unanimous.
Thank you. And can I now have a motion on 17321?
Motion to accept 17321.
Second.
Motion and second on 17321. If there is no objection, we'll take this one by unanimous consent. Seeing no objection, it passes. And thank you very much. We are now on to 17421. Ordered that, whereas the City and Clearwater Real Estate Investment Group LLC, a Massachusetts limited liability company having a principal, if it's okay, I'm going to skip the legalese for the council. Whereas there is an agreement for the city to sell property known as 130 Lunenburg Street, authorized by the City Council pursuant to petition 28118. Therefore, it is ordered that the City of Fitchburg shall approve and authorize through the mayor, same language as before. So this is to approve an agreement to sell property that we already approved the sale of. We just didn't have the actual agreement hammered out. Solicitor Presteri, do you, or
No, that's it.
Strauss?
I've tried to put the previous petition number in there so you can see how long it's been going on. And the buyer is, at this point, ready, willing, and able.
All right. Councilor Squalia?
Yes, so we had put this out for RFP, and we had gotten a bid back, but this was the one where we didn't accept it, and we renegotiated it. Is that correct?
We received one proposal in our initial round of RFPs, and so we decided perhaps we hadn't marketed the properties adequately, and so we went back to the drawing board and actually hired a Realtor to work with us, and so that's how we got 190 River Street was sold through that process, as well as 104 Daniels, which we had discussed previously. That sale actually ultimately didn't go through, but that had gone in front of the council in 2020. But then the same proposal that we received here is the same one we originally did receive in the first round. We just wanted to make sure we were doing our due diligence. This was really, we've done RFPs for big projects like BF Brown, for example, but doing it for small ones, we found to be a different animal altogether, and we're just kind of learning as we go as to how to do it effectively.
That's Peter's battery, right?
So was the value proposed the same? I didn't see the exact figure.
I believe at the time the value was $1,000, and now the value is $5,000.
Okay. Thank you.
Councilor Green?
Where exactly is 130 Street Lunenburg, just for landmark? Like, what parcel of property are we talking about?
130 Lunenburg Street is an old gas station, and it's right off of Lunenburg Street. It's in pretty rough shape, concrete construction. In terms of landmarks locally, Attorney Pusateri.
Lunenburg Street and Lincoln Street.
Across from ABS Gas?
Yeah.
I'm just East Side Diner.
I've been waiting on, thank you. It's been a property long in our problem property list with our NICE committee. It's a property with some pretty significant environmental liability associated with it. So again, while we're getting $5,000, we're also getting somebody who's committed to taking on that liability and bringing it up to productive reuse. I believe the proposal was for a coffee shop.
A coffee shop.
Correct.
And just to confirm, if I understood correctly and if I'm remembering correctly, are we including language in this as we have in other RFPs that basically provides that if they do not successfully complete their project within a certain time frame, the property reverts to us for future sale?
Correct, and that's one of the reasons why, even though RFP is more complicated, it takes a lot more time than an auction. We do want to still utilize that form for those properties that we wouldn't want to see something like that happen, where we'd auction it and then it sit there for decades longer and continue to be a problem property. So this continues to give us that flexibility.
As well as the price.
Councilor Fleming.
So I guess I just wanted to, they're renovating the space for commercial purposes. Could be a small restaurant, office space, or a small business shop. So it's got a few.
Thank you.
Move to approve 17421.
Second.
I have a motion and second. If there is no objection, we'll take this under unanimous consent. Seeing no objection, it passes. Ordinance in its final reading.
Move 16421 be sent to its third and final reading, ordained, enrolled, and advertised.
Motion and second. I'm sorry, do we need a roll call on this, correct? I believe we need a roll call on this. Anyone speaking on the motion? Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Counselor Walsh?
Yes.
President Zarella?
Yes.
Counselor Boishman?
Yes.
Counselor Kuchar?
Yes.
Counselor Di Natale?
Yes.
Counselor Fleming?
Yes.
Counselor Green?
Yes.
Counselor Hughes?
Yes.
Counselor Schultz?
Yes.
Counselor Squalia?
Aye.
Counselor Van Hazinga?
Yes.
That is unanimous.
Thank you. We have 17521, Councilors Fleming and Hughes to rename Union Street, located in Ward 5B, to Adrian Ford Way. This will be sent to City Property and Public Works. It's also listed for Legislative Affairs, but in consultation with Councilor Walsh, we have determined that there isn't actually a need for review by Legislative Affairs. So unless there is any objection, it will not be sent to Legislative Affairs. And then we have 17621, Aurelio and Lovely Lacombe, doing business as Aurelove Motors, to petition for a Class 2 dealer's license located at 71 John Fitch Highway. That will be forwarded to Public Safety.
Is that somewhere?
I'm sorry?
Where is it?
And we have a few, I'm sorry?
I don't see it on here.
I'm sorry, I don't have 176 listed in our petitions.
Was it when the agenda was revised?
It was a
It was a revised
Yeah,
agenda.
there was a revised agenda.
I
put out.
apologize, counselors.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
We have a few announcements this evening. On Monday, October 25th, a Ward 1 meeting is scheduled for 6:30 PM in the Legislative Building, 700 Main Street, to be hosted by Fitchburg Ward 1 City Councilor Bernie Schultz. Tom Skorowski, the Executive Director of Planning and Community Development, will make a presentation, and additional presenters may also speak depending on the urgency of their information.
Did you say the time? I'm sorry.
Excuse me?
Did you say the time?
6:30.
6:30. Thank you.
Representative Kushmerek has partnered with Representatives Higgins and Zlotnick, as well as Senator Cronin, in their mutual goal of addressing the mental health crisis. As such, there have been 2 public listening sessions scheduled for individuals to share their experiences with the mental health system in North Central Mass. The sessions will take place on Wednesday, September 28th, from 5:30 to 7 in Fitchburg, or on Tuesday, October 5th, from 5:30 to 7 in Leominster. For more information, including registration links, visit the city website or contact Representative Kushmerek's office directly at 978-829-1954. I'm going to repeat that from the beginning since I stumbled. 978-829-1954. And that concludes our agenda. Councilor Squalia.
Yes, announcements. This weekend is Fitchburg Open Studios on Saturday and Sunday. You can go to fitchburgopenstudios.com to see the map of all the different, there's over 30 artists that are opening up their studios that you can go see. And also on Saturday is the Fitchburg Forgin Blacksmith and Art Music Festival at Fitchburg Riverfront Park from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m., and that is rain or shine.
Thank you. That concludes our agenda for this evening.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
I have a motion and second to adjourn. If there is no objection, we are adjourned.
Steve.